A quiet June evening in a small town saw off the day. The sun was rapidly rolling over the horizon on the sky surface of the dawn, painting the last rays of the roofs of gray brick high-rise buildings. The rains had recently fallen, and the evenings were still cool. In the morning, a thick, wet fog hung over the city. While it was getting cold outside the windows, a tall, statuesque woman was walking down the street of the still warm city. She was in her 30s. She had a figure that would make anyone envious. Emily was pretty, but her clothes were a bit plain. Well, as they should be for a mom of many children. A job as a cleaner at a large construction firm was a lifesaver. Emily did not receive education, was engaged exclusively in the family. She married for the first time at 18, got pregnant while still in school from the most handsome and athletic guy. Everyone envied her, as well as him. Emily was considered the most beautiful girl in school. And Damien was the most eligible. How many girls had shed bitter tears when they became a couple and kissed for the first time in front of everyone at the school disco in 9th grade? How many boys had tried to fight for Emily's heart, challenging Damien to a duel? But he was stronger than the others every time and made it clear to everyone, I won't give it to anyone. Eventually they got married. A year later, Eva was born. 2 years later, Damien was born. And after 3 years, Damien got tired of supporting his family. I wanted to go out, vacation with friends. Neither Emily nor Damien went to school. Work was hard. He was tired of both the marriage and his beautiful wife, who had not gained a gram, having given birth to 2 children. Emily was also too young, did not immediately realize that she was not ready for a serious family relationship. She was tired of carrying the whole household and 2 kids on her own, tired of being alone all day long. It was hard on her. As it happened, Emily's parents died young, and she barely remembered them. Damien, on the other hand, had been taken from the orphanage when he was an adult. He didn't get along with his foster family, so he didn't expect any help from them. Damien started drinking, cheating. He was constantly getting kicked out of one job or another. And Emily was always worrying and crying about it. There was nowhere else to go. When Emily was getting married, her grandmother insisted that the girl should take up her mind, have an abortion, enroll in school, and leave the wrong fiancé. What's there to do when all you have in your head is romance and love? Emily came to her grandmother in tears. He beats me, cheats, does not work, all the time drunk. I don't want the children to see this. Can we move in with you at least for a while? Grandma was a hard person, and I told you, Emily, you should have listened to me. If you'd asked me to move in, you'd be dragging your sons and daughters with you. What do I need them for? No, I won't. You made your own decision. You didn't give a damn about my opinion. Now you have to deal with it yourself. Emily realized it was useless to persuade her grandmother. Her parents had died years ago in an accident. Her grandmother was Emily's mom's mother. Emily's father, on the other hand, Sandra had disliked from the beginning. The fact that Emily looked so much like him only made it worse. Her grandmother raised her because she was ashamed to give her only granddaughter to Commordage, but to love and spoil her. No, there was no such thing. It was the last time they would see each other. Emily was to live in a house with Damien and the children, or rather, in a rented apartment. Damien rented it cheaply from a friend. Emily suffered for another year, endured beatings and drunkenness. Then she was courted by a man twice her age. Emily had nowhere to go, so she gave in to his advances. His name was Eden Stately, tall, with dark hair, beautiful deep-set blue eyes and a neat black nose. Nice-looking. Intelligent. He taught physics at the local college, held an adjunct position, and made a good living. Emily didn't go to him, though there was no great love, just desperation. I wanted a better future for the children, that they had a good, caring father. Isn't that Emily's maternal happiness? They got back together. She was officially divorced from Damien and dreamed of forgetting him like a bad dream. She thought their life would be like a fairy tale now, but it wasn't. Eden didn't like Emily very much either. He'd spent his whole life working. He even got his doctorate, but he stayed at his favorite college. He believed that vocation trumped money and everything else. Now that he was over 40 and time was running out, Eden decided to act as always, pragmatic and balanced. He found a woman with attractive forms, a statuesque beauty. In principle, she was not stupid and good-looking. Besides, she had already given birth, so she could do it again. He just wanted to procreate. And once they got together, he did everything he could to get Emily pregnant. She decided to give in. After all, why not? She's married. Let them have a child together. Eden was kind, generous, but rather pedantic. The toothpaste tube in his house had to be more than just closed. It had to lie parallel to the edge of the shelf. There was perfect cleanliness all around, and all Emily's things had to be laid flat. Otherwise, Eden would start correcting things and grumbling about how messy everything was. She was willing to oblige him in his little whims and oddities, though. After Damien, Eden seemed the perfect man. So Emily gave birth to his daughter Darcy. Then a year and 4 months later, a second daughter, Kate, was born. They looked just like their handsome father. In fact, they took the best of their mother's good looks from her. The girls were real beauties, one better than the other. Eva was different from them. She had her father's looks, blonde hair, big blue eyes, and dimples on her cheeks. Beautiful, no doubt, but different. All the children got along with each other, no matter who was their father. Darcy and Kate knew they had another daddy, but they didn't think of him. It was Eden who had become a real father to all 4 of them. He managed to find an approach to each one and saw each one as an individual. Eden adored children. That's why he became a teacher. Emily appreciated how warmly he treated what were essentially other people's children, and she turned a blind eye to his coldness and aloofness toward her. They both realized that love had never been formed between them. It was just a union between 2 people when Emily was already 33. She realized she was pregnant again. We already have 4. I don't want to have another baby. The term is still small. I'm going to abort. Can I do it now? I'm not young. After all, I'm not planning any more children, Emily pondered. Eden posed, yes, I worked for months to get you pregnant again. Are you out of your mind at all? What abortion? This is my child, my flesh and blood. Are you going to kill him? Oh, come on, I already have 4, Emily objected. So do I. I'm providing for them, and I'll be able to take care of the 5th, Eden countered. The 4th birth had been hard on her. Doctors advised her not to give birth again, or to have a good treatment. At first, Emily decided enough was enough. So she didn't get treatment. She just got periodic checkups. I knew you'd be against it, said her husband. An argument ensued. Emily said she was going to abort anyway, but she didn't dare to do it. She was afraid of being alone, afraid of Eden's anger, and the procedure would take determination too. She was scared to have the operation. The doctor said that in her case it was better to give birth. An abortion could carry serious consequences too. You understand, I always wanted a son, and now I just want a son. Emily, for God's sake, please, Eden begged. And she stayed. The pregnancy had been easy. The labor was easy too, easier than all the previous ones. Their long-awaited son was born. They named him Vincent. 6 months later, Eden was gone, died on the job of a stroke. Emily was left alone with the children. On the first 2, she received nothing from her first husband, as he was successfully drunk somewhere on the outskirts of the city. The survivor's pension and child support covered the basic expenses, but school was dragging too much. And not just school, Liz went dancing. She needed costumes and shoes, which were expensive. Damien was in the soccer team. Darcy and Kate played piano. In addition, everyone was in school, which required uniforms, textbooks. Little Vincent was sick all the time. As soon as he turned 1.5, Emily put him in the nursery and got a job at the store. But there were shortages every now and then. The goods were affordable for the whole family. Often their drunken son came there in the middle of the night, took the goods and did not even write down, and the vendors always had to make restitution out of their own pockets. Eventually, Emily quit her job and was lucky enough to see an ad on the door of a huge office building. The cleaning lady there made more money than the store clerk. Besides, the workload was less. Clean the tiles and floor with professional tools and sit back. Emily was warmly received. True, not all. There were women in the office who considered themselves superior to others, and the cleaner for them in general a person of the second class. Emily was calm and polite. There was no escape. The head of the firm is young and ambitious. However, the employees said that things are not going well. At the beginning of the year, they had to cut some of their staff because of the slump in sales. People were worried about their jobs, but Justin promised that he could keep the company afloat. Evil tongues said that Eugene, the founder of the company, knew how to run the business, and as soon as he handed over to his only son, everything fell apart. But that's not what happened. No one knew that the slow decline of the firm started under his father's management when his son, this one studying abroad at the Business Institute, joined the firm. He made many suggestions for modifications. There was a need to keep up with the times, to move to the next level, take over the internet space and grow the business there. Eugene resisted this for several years, and the company's revenue continued to decline. That's when he stepped down, handing everything over to his son. He wasn't old enough. Everything new and modern wasn't easy for him. He needed someone who understood the internet to lead the company. Eugene decided to hand everything over to his son, but he did not believe in the success of the event. The only way for my son to step up is to make a serious investment. Besides, We need new horizons. Have you been friends with Poirot and Liz for a long time? If you were to marry, your union would help save my life's work. But think about it. Her father would make investments, introduce you to the right people, and you could open up an overseas market for us. You can't get in without connections. You realize our firm isn't popular enough to trade out of the country, but we could cover the regions of the near abroad if we could also save on personnel. You said the internet would provide us with that. It would be wonderful. His father's words hurt Justin. He knew how much he cared about his child, and he had been preparing for the presidency all his life. Before that, he had earned 2 college degrees at home and abroad. He was ready to take over to replace his father, but the company was in an unprofitable state. He stood at the helm of the sinking ship and began to implement his reforms. At first, the staff perceived Justin's leadership with skepticism. What does he know? Young, inexperienced, and even with foreign quirks in his head. However, 2 higher educations were received not for nothing, not for a checkmark. Justin was really learning to absorb knowledge. He wanted to become a worthy replacement for his father, but not at the cost of his own happiness. No, I can't do that. Work is work, but getting married to improve the firm's business is overkill. I don't like Liz, she's just a friend to me, even, I'd say, an acquaintance. The father shrugged. Whatever you want, it's in your hands. But the son was worried. He decided that if it was fate, it was worth a try. He hadn't spoken to Liz in years. What if she'd changed? Maybe she'd changed. What if he fell in love with her? After all, her parents are the model of a strong, happy family. Maybe she'll make a good wife. To him. They met. Justin took her to a restaurant. The girl was happy to see him. She picked the restaurant herself, the most fancy one. I don't like cheap eateries. I'm used to always having only the best, she smiled. And in that moment, Justin realized he still didn't like her at all. She wasn't his person, a blank slate. It was only going to get worse from here. He decided that he would try to stay with her longer. What if he jumped to conclusions hastily, wrongly? What if she just wasn't showing what was inside her? Liz loved partying, didn't shy away from humiliating her friends, asserting herself, dividing all people into the upper class and the rabble. She laughed loudly. She was brash and pompous. Her mom was different. Justin realized he had much more in common with her parents than he did with Liz herself. His father prodded, "Pay attention to the girl. Take a good look at her." What kind of a beautiful couple would you make? Justin, unfortunately, was used to listening to his father and didn't refuse him. Realizing that such a union would really pull the company together, allow it to flourish, there was no other girl Justin would like at that moment. And Liz started calling every now and then. Apparently, Justin was a very good match for her. She'd fallen in love and confessed it to him while drunk, and she got drunk a lot. And Justin didn't like it. The company's fortunes gradually improved. The new owner managed to stabilize the situation, but not without downsizing, and people began to worry. However, not every company can afford to keep a large team that does nothing. It was a forced measure. Gradually, Liz became a regular guest at Justin's house. He treated her in a friendly way, and that only turned her on more, making her fall in love with him. She hadn't known rejection before, and Justin acted like he wasn't interested in her. Liz was different around him. Even her dad noticed. "You're on your own, Justin. It's up to you, but I'd like to put in a good word for my daughter. My opinion is worth a lot." "You know," said Pete. "What do you mean?" "Liz has never once asked her mother to teach her how to cook. I thought you said you liked cabbage pies, so she went to school. It's like Liz has been replaced. She's in love. Justin, really. Which means she's depending on you. And the first thing I want to say is, please don't hurt her. I can't help her with that. The thing is, it's out of my hands, it's out of your life. There are rarely situations where something is out of my control. I'm used to controlling, managing. But here, it looks like you're the only one in control." Justin could see that Poirot was nervous, carefully choosing his words and wanting to get the point across. "I don't know what you want. Liz is just a friend to me, and if she has other feelings for me, I can step aside. I don't have a goal to hurt, or..." Pete sighed. "No, I wouldn't want that. I mean, she's windy, and she's in love. I'd like a son-in-law like you. I'll tell you that. But I don't love her," Justin said honestly. "Why be so secretive?" He tried to take his father's advice and look her over, but the more he looked, the less he liked her. That's no basis for a family. "Love isn't the point," Pete continued. What's important is that people want to create a new unit of society. I'll tell you a secret. My wife loved me very much, and I got married. Do I love her? I respect her. I appreciate her. I care for her. But the love was not, and is not. Do I regret marrying her? No, of course not. It's the best decision of my life to let a woman love me and start a family, and you'll be happy and content. After all, you can find love somewhere else. But if you have to, he winked conspiratorially. Justin realized that Liz was like his father. I'll think about your advice, he said diplomatically. Think about it. Besides, without my help, your firm will continue to teeter on the brink of collapse. And one day it will, believe me. It's the way things are now, you see. It's politics, I'll help you. No problem. It'll be an added bonus for you. And not only will you keep your company, but you'll be the head of mine. One day you'll have 2 kids. For example, one will take over your father's company, the other will take my chair. And you'll have a happy and secure old age. I'm not old anymore. I want to travel, to get away from business. Justin shook his head. He had planned their life for years to come until they were old, and the number of grandchildren was already determined. He said nothing more, ending the conversation. But from that moment on, everything changed. Liz began to intrude into his life with insolence. She moved her belongings, duplicated her keys. When Justin said he wasn't okay with it, she threw a tantrum. You tamed me, and we're responsible for the ones we tame. Why do you keep calling me? Why do you keep coming? You gave me hope. It's your fault I can't live without you. Justin's guilt was pretty well developed. He gave in to a woman's tears, and now they've been together for a year. Justin honestly said at the time that he had no feelings, but Liz was fine with that. After a while, however, she started demanding more attention, complaining and claiming that Justin didn't love her and wasn't affectionate with her. And then she apologized. This was how they lived day after day. He had felt increasingly disgusted with her over the last 4 months, couldn't even bring himself to touch her. It all spiraled out of control. He was taken in. He let it happen. He wanted what was best for him. He thought it would be lovey-dovey, but he didn't love her and he couldn't stand it. In the end, she was angry, but she wouldn't leave. She said she wouldn't let go. And Justin just lived, as best he could under the circumstances. Liz often came to his workplace and acted like a hostess. Her father was going to contribute to the company, become a shareholder. Besides, Liz acted like a hostess everywhere she went. She'd been spoiled, raised to own her life. Now it was too late to re-educate her. Seeing Emily for the first time, Justin smiled, thinking she was too good to be a cleaning lady, decided she must be dumb as a cork, since she has no brains or beauty, and has to hold such a position. But when I got to know her better, I realized it's not that simple. Just a life situation. She was exceptionally wise. It was interesting to have a few words with her. It even felt like she knew the answers to every question. Justin liked her, but of course he didn't think about getting closer. It wasn't about that at all. The idea of using Emily as a lightning rod had come to him spontaneously. He didn't have the courage to just break off the relationship, and that would lead to a serious fight between the families. Therefore, Justin decided to make Liz finally dump him on her own. She was very arrogant and proud, and she definitely wouldn't stand for cheating. Emily, I need your help, he said suddenly. Emily looked up and looked questioningly at the chief, stopping to dust the windowsill. Justin laid out his idea to her, in a straightforward, enthusiastic way. What's the big deal? Emily didn't understand. I can't. There are too many parties interested in our union. If I break it off, I'll be guilty, and there will be serious consequences. If I don't, well, you'd still be guilty. You're going to cheat, even if it's not for real, but that's different. Liz's dad will understand, man to man. In fact, he's the one who said you should marry for profit and make love on the side. So there's no moral high ground in that family. It's perfect. Okay, but why me? Emily persisted. You're beautiful. I saw Liz looking at you with envy. I never would have guessed that, Emily marveled. Liz was well-groomed from head to toe, about 8 years younger than she was. Was she jealous of her? A maintenance worker with 5 kids. That night, Justin was defeated. She turned him down. But a couple days later, she had to say yes. The boss kept trying to persuade her. Emily needed an advance. Damien was very sick. I'll give you the money without that, Justin said. He didn't want to get his own way. It was wrong and dirty. Fine, I'll help you without the advance, Emily replied. After all, Liz was the one who was annoying everyone in the office, walking around, giving orders, humiliating everyone. It would be easier to breathe without her. Justin and Emily discussed the details, and on the appointed day, when Liz arrived at her fiancé's house, they watched carefully through the cameras. As soon as Liz went upstairs and her footsteps were heard, Justin pulled Emily to him and began to hug her. Actually, he liked the kiss. It felt good, and he didn't even want to stop. Emily was surprised at her reaction too. She felt so sweet from his lips touching hers. It had started out as a play, a farce. But when Liz made them wince with her scream, they both realized they didn't want to interrupt. Emily blushed and ran out of the office to the loud sound of a slap. Liz snickered, first yelling, then crying. When she came out, Justin found Emily in the back room. He went over to her, put his arm around her. Tears glistened faintly in her eyes. She suddenly realized that she liked him, and it was excruciatingly painful to realize that he would never kiss her again. "Thank you. You saved my life. I was willing to lose everything just to not be with her." Liz had already planned a wedding with her father. "Did you ask her to marry you?" Emily asked, realizing that he still had his arms around her. No, Justin smiled broadly. "Even that happens. I got married without me," she smiled. "But I, as they said in that movie, changed my mind about getting married." They chatted sweetly in a tiny back room, without a single window. The bright light from the white bulbs shone in their eyes. It was stuffy, but both of them were happy and content at that moment. "You didn't just save me, you saved the company," Justin said thoughtfully. "Why does everyone say that Poirot wanted to make the investment and save us?" Yes, but he was silent about the terms of the investment. In fact, he would have become the head of the company, taken it away from us. And my father started the company from scratch. He was fine with it, as long as his baby didn't sink. I'd rather it didn't. I'd rather start from scratch and develop it myself than leave it in the wrong hands. Besides, Poirot's a trickster. He's a brilliant lawyer who made his fortune by cheating his employers. First he'd get one case, then he'd take over a whole company. His companion, loyal as a dog, Woland. He went to jail for him several times, took responsibility for him. But each time he got out before he got there. It's a miracle, isn't it? There were rumors that he was a very dangerous man. I didn't want to get involved with them. After talking to Emily, Justin said goodbye to her and went home. However, there was an unpleasant surprise waiting for him. His father gave him such a hard time that it got to the point of yelling. "You're going to ruin my life's work. I gave my life to build this company. I'm sorry that the company is more important to you than my happiness. You have no idea who Liz really is. She's stupid and empty, and I don't like her at all. Why should I marry her? I'd rather work as a janitor than be happy and free." "Why did you work as a janitor, son?" "No, because I provided for you. Nobody's forcing you to live with her all your life. Well, you could have at least put up with it for a year. Is this hard for you? You think it's okay to use people like that? Aren't you afraid Poirot will send thugs to our door? If I do that to his daughter, and you're not afraid to give him the company?" He didn't just want to invest. He wanted to do it at the time of the stock transfer. He would have taken the whole thing. His father sank down on the couch, slowly pulling his hand up to his heart. Justin was afraid that Dad wasn't feeling well. "No need for a doctor. Go away. I want to be alone," Justin said. Justin walked out, leaving his dad alone. Soon Pete called him. "Did you hear that Liz caught you with the cleaning lady?" he said calmly. Justin was wildly nervous. This man could easily have stuffed him in the trunk, driven him to the woods, and buried him. "Yeah, that's what happened. I don't care. I've already put together the paperwork. Business is business. Your wedding is part of the business deal. I talked to my daughter. Liz is fine with the wedding. She loves you. She's just wondering if she'll forgive you. But she's willing to try anyway. I don't care what's between you two. But you're going to have all the heads, all the bigwigs at your party. It's going to be quite an event. You walk in wearing a tie, you smile for business. And if you want, you can file for divorce the next day. Your father would be thrilled with my offer." "How about you?" Justin sighed heavily, as if he were being dragged to a place he didn't want to go. "I need to think about it. Let's do it at night." "That's enough. Calm down," she said, and slapped him. Apparently for not loving her, she cried and left. How he regretted starting the relationship in the first place. 6 days before the wedding, Justin got an early morning call from the hospital. "We have your father, Justin." He was brought in by ambulance. Justin was shaken. "What's wrong with him?" he asked. "It's a stroke." Justin rushed to the hospital. Soon Liz and her father Pete arrived there. "You're here too," Justin wondered. "How could we not be? Your father and I planned your wedding. I'm sorry it turned out this way. He's been going through a lot, takes everything personally. You can't do that." Justin felt guilty in front of everyone. He listened to his father and for nothing. He should have looked for other options to save the company from the beginning. Why had he listened to his dad in the first place? But if he had listened to him, he should have gone through with it. Thoughts swarmed in his head, stinging like wasps. He sat in the hallway all day. Pete had gone instead to an important meeting where a favorable agreement was to be made. Justin was a total wreck. It was like that the next day and the day after that. He was allowed to see his father, but he needed help after his stroke and couldn't speak. He couldn't speak at all. Seeing him in that state made Justin very anxious. He couldn't think. It was Poirot who took care of the work and the cases. Look what that Pete is doing without you. He's brought his vole in here. He's locked himself in your office, digging through files all day long. I don't care if Dad could die. Doctors don't make any guarantees. You don't live long after a stroke. I don't know what to do, I don't know. To go on living. The company still cannot raise to the previous level without serious investment. Maybe Dad was right and Poirot is our only salvation. Justin changed his mind. Now it looked like he just screwed it up. He should have listened to his father in the first place. Justin walked into the room with irritation on his face. Either come out and do everything on your own or let me work properly. I'm not a boy either, he said sharply. Justin stepped into your situation, dropped all his business and I'm doing yours. He postponed the wedding, and a couple of lucrative contracts for me fell through. Don't you know what I'm even wasting my time for right now? If you and Liz don't even see each other anymore, I've done enough for your firm, Justin, to earn my signature. And in the future, when I become a shareholder, if I become a shareholder, because nobody seems to be giving me any guarantees, I'll have it anyway, he continued. Justin realized that Pete was right. All their arrangements had been lip service. The wedding was postponed. Justin even withdrew the application, and all that was real was Poirot's help. It was real. It was in the company accounts. I'm sorry, you're right. I'll make a power of attorney for you. Thank you for all you do for us during this difficult time, Justin replied. 2 days later, Justin made everything official, and a week later he found out that half of his employees were looking for work. What's going on? Why are you laying people off? Justin asked. The thing is, they just sit there and just get paid. For what? My man replaced 5 of your slackers. The company wouldn't be profitable if you squandered money like that, Pete replied. Justin waved his hand. His father started talking, and that's what was important. However, 2 more weeks later, when Justin arrived at the office, he didn't recognize him. A security guard stood at the door and asked for identification before letting him inside. I'm the owner of this firm. What's going on anyway? He asked, pulling his passport out of his pocket. Instead of Emily, another woman, unfamiliar to Justin, sat at the desk. Of the old employees, there was only a lawyer who had come in relatively recently. Now the thought crept into Justin's head that he was a spy that Poirot had picked up. Where are my staff? What's going on? Justin asked. Liz came out of the room adjacent to the principal's office. Her father was sitting in a chair, glancing at Justin with a frown. They quit. The paycheck didn't work out, Liz said. Where's my cleaning lady? Justin asked. He knew she had nowhere to go. I fired her, Pete said. Justin didn't smile at the joke. I suspect that might have been the case. I left the company. And that's what it's become. Is there anything else I need to know about? He asked. I suspect it won't be the last surprise. Yeah, here you go. I had no idea things were so bad, Pete replied. Justin began to read the documents, and after a careful study he realized that the prosecutor's office had nailed the company to the wall, so much so that he would owe money, and he'd probably go to jail. There were such figures, such articles, that Justin couldn't believe his eyes. How did you do it, Pete? I mean, everything was fine when I left the firm. There may have been some delinquencies, but they were minimal, within 3 months. And I couldn't have had those delinquencies, Justin said, puzzled. It was sleight of hand and no fraud. Justin familiarized himself with another document. This is the only way out for you. You'll get away with it. He read a prepared agreement that completely absolved him of liability. In essence, it offered to sell the company retroactively for nothing. Poirot's buyer, Liz, marveled. Liz stood behind her father's shoulder with her arms folded across her chest. What did you think? Stupid. That it was okay to mix me with dirt, to humiliate me. No, sweetheart. You're gonna pay for this performance. I know you just didn't know how to get rid of me. And I, a fool in love, would do anything for you. Your company is the compensation for my moral damage. Do you understand? Justin looked at Liz, at her father. There was no one to consult, and it was dangerous to talk to his father about it now. In his condition, nervousness was contraindicated. The news of losing the company would be devastating to him. He signed it. Liz stared at him, not sure what was going on. By her calculations, he shouldn't have been smiling, but rather hysterical, sobbing and begging for a chance. Her feelings didn't go away so quickly. There was still hope in her soul. What? Are you scared? Are you having fun? You've lost everything. You lost your father's company, she said venomously. Justin looked at her dyed hair, at her long, unnatural nails. at the bright makeup that added to her age. She had a fashionable, haggard thinness that he didn't find attractive at all. But most importantly, she had so much anger inside. "I'm glad I won't be seeing you again. Liz, it was Dad's fault." Of course it was his idea. Our alliance, and he trusted. "Pete, why did you listen to him? Why would I do that? And I'm guilty, of course, and I'm guilty to you too. But you outdid me. I really wanted to connect with you. I really thought we could be a couple, but we're completely different." Liz had tears in her eyes. "You didn't try hard enough. You didn't try at all. I was the one who tried my best to be a good match for you," she said through her tears. "But now I don't owe you anything. I'm done." "I signed the papers, Eugene." Justin handed the papers to his father-in-law and walked out in silence, closing the door of the office he'd thought of as his own since he was a boy. He had once flown in here in a whirlwind, happy to see his father, and he was happy. He was always happy to see his son. He always put things off if Vincent came. Sometimes the son would spend hours in the corner there. Dad used to even have a separate couch and table where he spent time keeping company. Eugene didn't have much free time for Justin, so he'd bring him along and they'd socialize between errands, meetings, and gatherings. Walking out of the building, Justin involuntarily brushed away a tear. It had all ended so stupidly. Coming to his father, he looked at him sadly, not knowing how to tell him about everything. "What, son, talk, don't be afraid. They give me so much medicine that it is no longer scary," he spoke slowly, but already smiled. Poirot took the company away. Justin couldn't help himself. He told all the details, how things were with Liz, and how much he didn't want to be with her. His father smiled. "That's it, son." Then it was time to move on. The company was unprofitable. Let's be honest, getting attached to a building is silly. Yes, we spent many years there, but maybe fate is giving us a chance to start something else. You know, I, for one, love cars. Maybe you and I should start our own cab service around town. I love our town, its roads, its people. I even love the traffic, to be honest. I'm tired of management. That's why I quit. I'd had enough of that game. Let Poirot play it out. Let's not be greedy. So calm down, son. I can't cancel this day as a holiday, but you can have a drink tonight, said the father. Justin talked to his father for a long time. After that, he went home to rest. He had to look for another job. The next 4 weeks were spent looking. The company was gone. His savings were rapidly running out. Justin tried to get a job in the city, but he kept getting rejected. Pete did his best. He blacklisted him, threatened the big firms, intimidated them. Tired of trying unsuccessfully to find a job, Justin went to his former office to see Pete. "You took the firm away from us." "What? Not enough. Dad's still sick. We need money for his treatment. A man's life depends on it. Leave us alone. I gave you everything already," Justin said. "You think I've forgotten how my daughter cried in front of me because of you?" Pete said hatefully. Justin didn't know what to do. I guess the only thing left to do was to move. Only his father. But Poirot's power had its limits. Justin turned to leave, but Pete called out to him, "If you want, I'll take you here. We don't have enough good people. I fired a lot of people while I was cleaning the company of you. Do your best. If you do a good job, I'll make sure you're off the blacklist. This is my punishment to you for my daughter." Justin didn't care. He was already tired of looking for work and counting pennies, saving for everything. So he took it. And the next day he was already out. No one signed a contract with him. Now the company was saving on tax deductions. Officially it worked only 4 people. Poirot made his own. Justin worked without a day off for a whole month, filling in for both the storekeeper and other workers. When it came time for payroll, the accountant shrugged. There was no order. Sorry, Justin went to see Poirot in person, but the latter pretended as if he didn't know him. "Did he work for us? Where's the contract? I'll call the prosecutor's office. I'll complain," Justin said. "And I'll say you stole property from us worth more than your salary. The prosecutor is an old friend of mine. We go to the bathhouse with him on weekends. So if you go to see him, say hello to him," Poirot replied. Justin was furious. Money was getting scarce. Hopelessness was eating away at him. What to do? It was time to take his father home. There was no more money to keep him in the clinic. But who would look after him? Who would care for him? And who would work? He was really tired. Walked into the bar, remembering everything that had happened. Justin piled on the booze, ignoring the appetizer. As he left the place, he felt like he'd had too much to drink. It was late fall outside. The trees were bare and leafless, and the puddles were frozen underfoot. Justin slipped on one of them and hit the back of his head. "This feels so good," he said. Felt scared. Tired of working for a month without a single day off. Hearing promises of a good raise and going for nothing in the end. But what kind of man is this Poirot? How could he do this to people? With these thoughts, Justin fell into a troubled sleep right there in the middle of the deserted street. He dreamed of Emily. He remembered that she had been kicked out, and he wanted to help find her, to talk to her. Opening his eyes, he remembered that he had fallen asleep right there in the street. He was blinded by a bright light, and it was as if someone was leaning over him, an angel. A little girl with a bunch of red hair and wings. What about my father without me? And why did I get drunk? Fell asleep to death, Justin realized. Mom, your uncle is awake now. Can I turn on the cartoons? Shouted the angel loudly. Justin shook his head and saw that he was in a small room on an old iron bed behind a cheap striped mattress. Emily walked into the room. Justin didn't realize how he had ended up in her house. What did you think, Apostle Peter? She asked, folding her arms across her chest. Is it okay to get so drunk? Barely dragged you home, she said. And why the girl in the angel costume? They're trying to give me a heart attack. You should have dressed her up as a devil. Just then another little girl came running into the room, very much like the first one. Sandra was dressed as a devil with horns. Justin flinched and the girl laughed and ran out of the room. Well, stop scaring your uncle, Emily smiled. Justin got up from the bed. These are my daughters, Darcy and Kate Tace. Were 1-year-olds. They had a masquerade ball at school. They were allowed to choose any costumes they wanted, so they did. Scaring people is their favorite thing to do. The woman gave Justin tea after he took a shower. She said she was coming back from the market in the evening, where she'd gotten a job after quitting her job at the farm. Found Justin on the ground, picked him up and brought him home. You were talking all about your dad yesterday. How is he? Better. But he still needs care, and I don't know where to go. You wouldn't believe how many stupid things I've done. Justin told her everything. Everything from the beginning to yesterday, when he'd realized that working for Poirot was another mistake he'd made. Well, you're just confused. It's nothing. I didn't get kicked out easily either, did I? They didn't pay my wages for a month and a half. They threatened to blacklist me. I left without making a fuss, went to the market, selling, helping to clean and set up the goods. It's terribly cold, but tea and warm clothes keep me warm. I don't know what it's like in the winter. Liz did her best. She's got the social services on us. We're on their radar now. She also found my landlady, who I'd been renting from for years, and made her kick us out. She put some pressure on us. We ended up finding this place. Justin noticed that they lived in a very poor house. Their shower was homemade. The walls were shabby and in a terrible state. I'm sorry. It's all my fault, he said. Yes, Emily said, but then she smiled. But I'm not angry. I helped what seemed like a good man get rid of a bad one, and you'll get back on your feet. Dad's gonna be okay. Everything's gonna be okay. Just don't drink anymore. I'm not a drinker. Don't think so. I've never been that drunk. Just circumstances. Suddenly, he had a great idea. Listen, how much are you paying for this tuition? The woman gave him a figure. What if you moved in with us? We have a very big house. Dad bought it. I hope to have a big family. It was a birthday present. I've got an apartment downtown, a few cars. I'll have to sell some things, but I'll keep the house. I don't live in it. We'll move. We'll each have our own room. It's like a castle, 2 floors. 7 bedrooms, each floor has its own bathroom and toilet. There's even a separate room with a bathroom and toilet. I'm planning to move my father there. You'll help me get him out, and I'll get a job at the market, make some money. We'll get out together. I'll pay what I can. I'll bring food to the house. Since we have to survive, let's join forces. I can't afford a nurse right now, and if I'm with my father, I can't earn money. I won't be able to find a good place now. That's my only choice. Or do I give Dad to a specialized clinic that treats lonely old people? It was a crazy idea, but Emily didn't say no. She just asked for time to think about it, to consult with the children. The kids said they wanted to live in a big house. So a few days later, Eugene had a whole bunch of caregivers. The children ran to him every now and then, asking if he needed anything, and Emily took care of him. Justin worked all day at the market, bringing home money not much, but enough to live on. Emily cooked dinner. Justin talked about his day. Slowly but surely they began to grow closer, and Eugene got better soon enough. Emily read different techniques for recovering from a stroke, making him do simple exercises, treating him with herbs. After 6 months, Eugene didn't seem to need a caregiver anymore, and he even had some savings. Son, let's start a business, he suggested again. A construction business. No, I don't want that anymore. Remember when I told you about the cab business? I want to drive around town and just give people rides, he said, smiling. So they sold an old and very expensive foreign car and bought 3 cab cars. One of the companies laid off employees. A loyal and devoted family friend started working with them. Justin registered as an entrepreneur, got all the permits, and became a businessman again. Profits were small at first, of course, but soon they were able to expand. They bought another car, hired another old acquaintance, who was also left without a normal job because of Poirot. Emily, on the other hand, was a dispatcher, taking calls from home and taking care of the house and children. It was a lot of work. A year later, she and Justin were married. Quiet but fun with family. Eugene was happy. He'd long dreamed of a big family, and he liked Emily a lot. She was coming out to him, and he called her his daughter from the first days, and Emily's children just called him Grandpa. One day, Justin took a call not far from his former company building. The man that got into the car began to discuss with his partner the deal that Poirot had offered him. Profitable, tempting, but I'm afraid to enter into such a contract. Passing through the market where Justin once worked, they headed for the movie theater. The kids asked to go into the park, so they decided to cut through the market. There were 6 of them. Eugene stayed home with Emily's youngest son. The others had left. Liz, Justin casually glanced around one of the perfume stalls and saw Victoria Poirot there. She no longer shone with glamour. Apparently all their accounts and assets had gone so bad that she'd had to look for work. Poirot will have complete authority over our firm. The blonde-haired man in the gray suit was on the phone at this point. Justin slowed down. The passenger looked at him in surprise. "I'll tell you what Poirot will do to your company," Justin said, and told the stranger his sad story. The man proved to be very impulsive. "I'm sorry about what happened to you." "Thank you. I don't seem to be in your debt." Poirot boasted that the prosecutor was his friend. "Well, the prosecutor is my wife's father. It looks as if, thanks to you, I'll nail that scum and put him away. And there's more in my gratitude for you. If you hadn't intervened, it looks like I'd have lost everything. And so would you. And maybe I would have gotten a job with you in a cab." Finished talking, Justin drove the passenger to his seat and drove on. He didn't think this brief dialogue would lead to such serious consequences. "Turn on the radio quickly," shouted their phone to Emily. They were listening to the same station, and Justin quickly pressed the button. There was just a free one in the car. After another order, the radio was reporting on a high-profile case involving a prominent businessman, Pete Poirot. Justin hadn't heard everything. Emily called him back and told him that both Poirot and Voland were in jail. She didn't know how to work. She'd bought her degree. Apparently, she'd made such a reputation for herself that they'd only taken her to the market. "What are you looking at?" She angrily glanced enviously at Emily, who was walking beside Justin. "Go where you're going with your hoard." The kids stared at Liz, not understanding why she was angry. Angry Aunt Kate remarked, "Let's go away or she'll pounce again," Emily said, and laughed. And off they went, leaving Liz behind. The wife reluctantly packed her things to leave her husband. But hearing the voices of her husband and mother-in-law, she hid. Carol sat in the stall at her workplace and fell asleep due to the change in weather. She wanted to sleep all the time. The bell rang and a customer appeared near the window. "A scone, please, and 2 poppy seed muffins," the man asked. Carol handed him the purchases and sat back in her seat. Despite such a simple job, she would rather have something physical than sit like this all day, pecking her nose. The customers were good in the morning and from 3 o'clock on, but the rest of the time the woman entertained herself with embroidery or reading books. Carol remembered the 5 years of hard study she had spent at the institute. And now, years later, it turned out that higher education had no meaning for her. After studying, the girl went to work as an engineer at a factory. It closed after 3 years. Carol was disappointed in her future for several years and realized that only in big cities education mattered. The provinces only needed teachers, and for jobs that were distributed in advance to family and friends. Carol didn't stop there. She tried a change of specialty. She finished courses and became a landscape designer. During that period, she met her husband, Daniel. She had high hopes then, which again were not realized. There were few people in the city who were willing to pay specialists to design landscaping projects for plots and gardens. The company promised Carol that they would have projects from the city and possibly the regional administration. But time passed, and apart from the occasional order, nothing happened. Carol urged Daniel to go with her to the regional city, but her fiancé was strongly attached to his parents and didn't want to live in the city. So at almost 32, it seemed to Carol that her life was over. Yes, she married Daniel. They sold Carol's grandmother's old house, added the money given to them as a wedding gift, and took out a loan in her husband's name, as Carol had no official job at the time. Carol's husband did not have a college degree and did not particularly aspire to one. He worked in a warehouse where his mother had gotten him a job many years ago through her connections. Carol tried many things. She even worked at school. But since the girl was adamantly opposed to the system that killed children in schools, she didn't last long there. If someone had told me that I would just waste 5 years of my life, she sighed and put the book aside, I wouldn't have studied anywhere at all. You can learn everything online now. As a child, Carol loved inventing things. Her father taught high school drafting and her mother worked as a doctor. Her parents decided that engineering education would suit Carol. and the girl herself entered the institute with high hopes. Carol dreamed of getting some experience and entering graduate school in a big city, but she quickly had to come back down to earth. She didn't want to stay to teach at the institute. She was interested in practicing. But her parents didn't have the money for her to go where the research centers were located. And counting on a grant at her own institute was pointless because of the low salaries of teachers for many years. In the end, never having become an inventor, she sat in a stall and did not understand what to do next. After a 15 job at the store, Carol found a rather promising place. Of course, the salary wasn't great, but the 8 to 4 schedule with Sunday off suited her. Carol, hi, came from the other side of the window. How are you doing? Why are you so sad? Hi, Kyle, she sighed. What's there to be happy about? I'll probably never get out of this hole. But it depends on how you look at it, Carol's former classmate replied seriously. The glass is half full or empty. That's something only you can determine. Sometimes Carol envied Kyle. He was a head saint in high school, too. His family was very poor. His alcoholic father had drained his mother until he died. And in 11th grade, the kid's mother fell and was left disabled. Kyle's 2 older sisters left for more promising places, and he stayed to look after Elena Alexeyevna. Kyle, like a mom, thoughtfully asked Carol, "Take her a visitor." "You will." "Thank you." He took his bread and a small package from Carol. "Let's keep our spirits up, or you'll find happiness around the corner and you won't be ready for it." "I wish to God I could say that," sighed her classmate. "I'll probably be carried out of this stall." The meeting with Konstantin upset Carol even more, and so forever. But even earlier, Carol decided for the umpteenth time to talk to her husband today. She was sure he wouldn't agree to move from here to somewhere else. Still, the woman decided to give it a try. "What do I want?" she asked herself aloud. "But I'll start with a simple one. Do I want a lot of money?" Unequivocally, no. I want enough so that I don't have to think about not having a penny for bread in a week. I do not need an expensive car or a palace in principle. I need money as a tool for living, not for power and manipulating others. Let's move on. Family. I want children madly. I don't think there's any point in dragging it out any longer. Daniel and I have been married for about 5 years now. We've had enough to live for ourselves. The more Carol reasoned, the more she felt that her problem wasn't even the job. It was a matter of fulfillment. She was suffering from the fact that she couldn't find herself on the outside. Carol saw that she was not living her life. She wasn't realizing her potential at all. "It's your own fault," her mother-in-law often reprimanded her. "If you'd worked at school, everything would have been fine. But no, everyone's happy, but you're not. You're special." Carol put the book aside and surfed the internet again. She loved videos about cold core, single crystal synthesis, and other things that were recognized as pseudoscience. Although it had been proven more than once that it all worked in practice, people's consciousness hadn't yet reached those types of energy. If only we had such a device, we wouldn't need to build dangerous nuclear power plants. A little box in every yard and everyone would have electricity, Carol whispered, and began to draw something on the paper. "Give me 2 bottles of Budweiser beer." Carol's slightly gruff voice brought Carol back to her senses. She handed over the bread, smiled crookedly. She didn't feel like saying anything back when the bread was already cheaper. The man didn't wait for the saleswoman's reaction and went into action himself. "You've got a nerve. All their own. And bread costs as much as abroad." Carol shrugged her shoulders. She didn't want to get into a discussion. She couldn't influence the pricing in any way. And it was not only pointless, but even dangerous to take all the blame. The customer left, but Carol's mood had completely soured. She started to go home. It was an hour before the stall closed. Carol felt sad again. She dialed her husband. "Hi. How are you doing?" she asked Daniel. "Will you be there today as usual?" "No, I'll be late, maybe a couple hours," he sighed. "There's a shipment coming in late today, and we have to take it in." Carol wasn't in much of a mood to go home. Everything was boring. If she could get away from this life, she'd do it. Tangled in her coat. Despite the wind, she still decided to walk. The beginning of April was cold. There was still snow in some places. Carol walked toward the river. Her hands were cold, but for some reason she was drawn there. The woman approached the bank. Carol suddenly shuddered. "Are you doing something?" Glaring at him with her eyes. "Thinking," he answered calmly. "See," he pointed with his hand at the ice. "Why does it float?" "Well, because water expands when it freezes and becomes lighter." Carol answered at once. "Why does it expand?" He sighed. "No one knows. No one has been able to see how water molecules rearrange themselves into a crystalline structure. Just a moment, and the water in front of us is no longer water, but ice." "Is this a matter of life and death for you?" Carol tried to make a joke. "Yes," Kyle answered seriously. "I've been working on an invention for several years now. I want to create a substance that would restore the structure of Mom's hip bone." "What does ice have to do with it?" Carol couldn't understand. "You want to put it on the sore spot?" "No, I want a liquid that can expand when it hits the bone tissue, and thus create a porous bone structure. After my mom's fracture, all of her bones are flattened." "Honestly, I can't even imagine how that would be possible," Carol thought. "If you inject this fluid into the muscle, the body temperature will prevent it from changing structure. Therefore, this fluid in its original state must exist at a higher temperature." His eyes lit up. "I've already gotten it, but I don't have time to inject it yet. It's already getting viscous in the syringe." "You amaze me," Carol whispered in amazement. "But I still don't understand how it can be done." "The idea is this: I inject a certain substance, and at body temperature it becomes viscous and expands. I need to inject it near the problem bone. Then this substance will lift the bone tissue a little bit and keep it that way for a certain period of time. The bone tissue regenerates quickly, and a new healthy area appears. About a week to 2 weeks later, the substance breaks down into water and other safe elements." "But if you look at it all theoretically," Carol lit up, "then you need an inhibitor to slow down the solidification of this substance ahead of time. Although I still don't believe it can be done." The conversation with Kyle was a real jolt to the woman. What Kyle was doing seemed more miraculous than real to her. But let's say such a substance existed and could be administered. She pondered on the way home. How would it determine that it needed to work on bone and not other tissue? Carol got home and began to do her chores. But Kyle and his idea never left her mind. She was grasping at it like a straw, you might say. It had been so long since Carol's mind had solved such complex problems that the woman had taken a keen interest in the whole thing. Late in the afternoon, her husband returned. Carol's eyes were burning. She wanted to tell him everything. "Daniel, do you remember my classmate Kyle?" She spoke quickly. "Well, he's doing something so interesting right now. He wants to invent a drug to cure his mother." "What a load of crap." Daniel made a disgruntled face. "He's had her for over 10 years with a fractured femoral neck. People can't get up. She's gonna die, you idiot." Why is he an idiot? The wife took offense. Maybe he can do something. Many inventions were created by amateurs, not professionals. "Because he's an idiot." The man said unkindly. "I've seen your Kyle. It's written all over his face that he's a worthless man." "I don't agree with you," the wife countered. "Kyle doesn't drink, he doesn't smoke, he works. He's a decent man." "He's lazy." Daniel waved his hand. "Don't spoil the mood. I don't want to talk about this garbage." Daniel sat down at the table. Not that Daniel was any different from anyone else, but in his mind he was a real man. Of course, everyone in the neighborhood knew that Kyle was taking care of his mother. Many people found such things surprising, but didn't like it. Daniel himself had also lived across town with his mother before he got married. Carol and Daniel were able to buy a home inexpensively in this area of town that was considered the most up and coming. "Daniel, let's go somewhere else." Carol couldn't take it anymore. "I can't live here anymore." "I'm not leaving my mother, I warned you right away," he replied. "Maybe she'll move in with us later too." Carol tried again. "No, she wants to stay here." And Carol, "Well, don't you start. Go to work at the school, and your ardor will diminish immediately." In the beginning of their acquaintance, Carol felt like she was behind Daniel like a stone wall. But after a few years, she began to notice that her husband was not inclined to talk openly or to change. He was a very closed, conservative man, even though he didn't realize it. Carol suffered greatly from this. She could be called sociable, and at first the girl was sure that she could find a common language with Daniel. But time showed that she wouldn't. "Okay, Daniel, if you don't want to leave here, then let's plan a baby. Where else can we wait?" she raged. "That's something you and I will discuss later," he replied coldly. "Carol, will you let me have a quiet evening? I'm tired." There was nothing left for Carol to do but forget everything and do some business. How often do young people fall in love? They think their love will last forever. But time passes, and both begin to notice that they have not chosen the most suitable partner. And it becomes scary. Why is it so? Everything was great in the beginning. Unfortunately, each of us enters marriage not with a real person, but with our own expectations. So when our expectations are not met, we begin to see our partner as he or she really is. And of course, the reality is very different from the desired reality. Someone begins to work on himself, and the relationship improves, or people break up. But such a minority. The rest try their best to maintain the standards imposed on them and go on with their lives. That's what Carol thought, that now she would have to die with Daniel on the same day. Carol went to sleep again, such an impenetrable darkness enveloping her. She cast a glance at her husband and shuddered. He seemed foreign and distant to her. The next day was warmer. Carol didn't even turn on the heater. It began as it always did, first the receiving of goods, and then the customers crowded around her stall. Carol tried to smile at them, but she wasn't in the mood. She saw a picture in front of her that she had taken a wrong turn. Her parents didn't get involved in her daughter's life, and she couldn't talk to them. They, too, held views that were considered normal in society. By the end of the day, Carol realized that she was dying to talk to Kyle. But he was coming in every other day for bread. He wasn't officially working anywhere. He couldn't leave his mother all day. He worked part-time, did odd jobs, hired out to neighbors. None of his older sisters wanted to take on such a burden. So the man got by as best he could. The phone rang. Daniel said he was staying at his mother's house tonight. Carol knew the routine very well. Daniel had a difficult temper. He couldn't calm down for a long time, so after such conversations with his wife, he often spent the night at his mother's house, so as not to bring the matter to conflict. Perhaps it was Carol's own fault. If she caught fire, she couldn't stop until she got some result. And since it seemed to the woman that her happiness depended on moving to another city, or having a baby, she wanted to see this through to the end. "All right," the wife replied through tears. "Daniel," she wanted to say something to him, but refrained. "I'll miss you." It had been a lonely evening. It drove Carol further into a state of hopelessness. She felt like tearing up and throwing up. Maybe get a job in the area. An idea came to her mind. I won't be able to take it anytime soon. Daniel will never leave his mother. Daniel's father had died a year and a half ago. Now he was all the more reluctant to even think about another city. He was fine here. His mother was alone and needed looking after. Only unlike Kyle, Daniel felt like he was acting like a grown man. "I'm doing something wrong," Carol sighed. "It's like I'm walking in a vicious circle. There's no way out." It seemed she saw a dead end in every area of her life. The only thing that occurred to her then was to take a few days off for a few days off for a few days and just not think about anything. The next day was Friday, and the woman called the landlord first thing in the morning. He agreed to give her a couple days. Carol rejoiced when she saw her classmate. "But how are you doing? How are your experiments going?" "Well, some things are," he reported cheerfully. "Honestly, there isn't enough time." "I'd so like to see it," Carol admitted. "I can't believe it's possible. How does this substance reach the bone?" "Hey, I certainly don't understand it myself," the man shrugged. "It's just that if it stays in the tissue, it starts breaking down right away. I did experiments on my dog. Rex ran outside one night. He was mauled by other dogs. After some time, I tried to inject him near the sore spot, but there was no result. He healed all by himself." "Then why do you think it works on bone tissue?" The classmate couldn't figure it out. "And that's where the same Rex helped me again," laughed the man. Only now that restless dog was being pounded by someone. Anyway, he came back with a broken paw. I gave him shots, didn't even think anything would work. But to my surprise, after 3 days he could walk. I touched his leg and the bone had fused. I gave him another injection. And within a week he was running like before. I don't have lab equipment, so I can't tell you exactly how it all works. But right now it seems to me that this substance first expands the bone tissue and then absorbs into it, promoting regeneration. You want to come over and I'll show you. Kyle offered and started to pay because a couple more people came up behind him. Are you going to be home tomorrow? Carol shouted out from the stall. Kyle nodded affirmatively and waved at her. Despite the problems, I find Kyle's life much more interesting than mine. Carol sighed and began serving customers. And there was something about it all. Perhaps Carol's passion for scientific knowledge, an interest in learning something new. But she did go to Kyle's house the next day. Carol talked to her classmate's mother. She had seen her years ago, and it was obvious now how much the woman was suffering. Kyle dressed her, taking her for a walk outside. So, shall we go see it? He winked cheerfully at his guest. I'll warn you right away, my place is a mess. They entered the workshop. Yes, it was a place of sheer chaos, but it made Carol's blood boil. How happy was she to see all those scattered tools, flasks, coasters, checks, bits of different metals. Wow, her eyes lit up. Kyle, you've got a real lab in here. I'm the one with the mess right now. And when I start the process, it's sterile clean here on the table. The man led her over to a very strange setup. There were some tubes connected there, vessels through which some kind of gas was apparently being pumped. And how does all this work? She asked in amazement. Is it something organic? Well, of course, no hydrocarbons around here. Kyle smiled and began to explain to Carol how his device worked. But that was only the first part. The main part was the substance it produced. That was where all the value was. Have you tried injecting your mom with it yet? Carol asked cautiously. Carol was afraid. I'm scared too, he sighed. He had recently picked up 2 stray dogs with broken paws. So now I'm treating them. Wow, caught her guest's breath. It's working. She kept her eyes on her host. Yes, he sighed. But I want to add one more component. My intuition tells me the effectiveness might increase that way. Kyle, have you told your mom about your experiments? Carol inquired. She wants to try it, he replied seriously. Mom is already very tired of her disability. I feel very sorry for her, too. Yes, the case is too delicate. There are great risks. Little chance of anything? Maybe such a drug would work for dogs, but not for humans, sighed a classmate. That's the problem. Kyle supported her. It's not like I'm a scientist. I don't have that kind of knowledge. Sure, I've reread tons of books, even consulted with some experts. But I can't say out loud that it works. Kyle. Well, if it does work, what then? Curiosity was shared by Carol. But I'm not Henry Ford. I don't have a wife, Clara, who supported him no matter what. And the light saw the world's first automobile, the man sighed. But if it does come out that way, I'll be happy for those people who will have the opportunity to have real bones instead of titanium bones. So what? A lot of handicapped people will walk normally. Carol walked home. She wanted to cry and rejoice at the same time. Why cry? Because people like Kyle never asked for anything from anyone. They were altruistic and tried to bring something to people at the expense of themselves. Well, joy was a natural feeling from the fact that among the heart-centered people were these fools like her classmate. Daniel and his kind would never put such simpletons in line with themselves. It would be beneath their dignity. But it was Kyle, not him, who sought to improve the lives of all mankind. He used his last dime to buy the necessary drugs, assembling rig after rig until he got exactly what he wanted. These are the kind of people who just move science forward. They're real men with pumped-up brains, not bodies. The latter didn't matter much, except for the physical labor. There were many things going through Carol's mind. She, too, wanted to quit everything and do something, to invest her energies, to dream that something would work out, instead of sitting in her stall and being angry at life. Carol was in no mood at all, so she didn't call her husband. She felt a strong resentment toward him. Compared to Kyle, he looked retarded. His outlook on life showed that he didn't have much intelligence in him. She distracted herself with household chores. Her husband came home from work in the evening. He was kind of wooden. Daniel, is something wrong? His wife walked up to him. You look exhausted. Yeah, there was trouble at work today, he tossed off and went into the other room. Carol didn't bother to bother him, but there was pain in her soul again. Daniel seemed like a complete stranger to her. The weekend flew by quickly and Carol went back to work. The morning didn't go well. First, some grandfather got into a fight with her, always telling her that she'd stolen from him. In his opinion, she should have taken half as much bread from him. "Grandpa, do I have to add the rest of you out of my own pocket?" Carol answered him. "You're smoking everyone here," yelled an old man outside the stall. "Whatever price you want, that's what you charge." "Old age is no fun," said an elderly woman nearby. "It takes away everything, even your mind." The grandfather kept yelling, threatening to report him to the police when the saleswoman stopped paying attention to him. "Hello, Carol," the longtime acquaintance approached the stall with a wry smile. She had no idea how much Carol hated her, and the feeling was mutual. "Hello, Lucy," the woman replied calmly. As always, she did not want to prolong the conversation. She and Lucy had once worked together at the school. The latter stayed there, worked her way up to head teacher, and thought she had become a celestial. Well, since Carol was openly opposed to the school system, she was laughed at by the likes of Lucy. They made a good profit at the school, with some of the curtain money going into their pockets. And the rates for expensive gifts were set at the beginning of the school year. "I heard you and Daniel divorced." Lucy lowered her voice. "Why? Were they so out of character?" "What the hell is that?" Carol's eyes flashed. "We're fine, we're still together. But that chick he keeps driving around in his car is nothing like you." Lucy laughed out loud. "I heard it was someone from his work. It's not like his mom gave him a girl." "Is there anything else you need? Or is that it?" Carol tossed it to her. "Sorry, I got a lot of work to do." "Yeah," she said dismissively. "The truth hurts." She grabbed the bag of muffins and walked away. Of course, Lucy's words had hurt Carol. She trusted her husband. Yes, he was occasionally late for work, but that didn't mean anything. "Idiot," Carol whispered. "You'd better look at yourself, stolen money. Daddy's pockets are howling." No matter how much Carol urged herself not to think about the incident, all sorts of thoughts popped into her head. Meanwhile, Daniel was having a serious conversation. It was break time, and he went into the back room to see Lenora. The woman pretended not to pay attention to him. Daniel approached her, wanting to hug her. "Don't touch me." She waved him away. "I told you it's over between us." "Len, stop it." "I love you," he said in a gentle voice. "I broke up with my ex," she sobbed. "Are you still living with her?" "I just don't know how to file for divorce so that I can get the house back. I paid the loan on it," the man sighed. "You wouldn't even listen to me yesterday," Lenora said. "I don't care, the mistress didn't want to reconcile. You promised me that she wouldn't be in my life anymore." She sobbed. "I can tell you that again," he confirmed. "You give me time." When Daniel had met Carol, he'd thought he'd found his ideal. The girl seemed smart, reliable. Of course, the young man had serious relationships before her, but he had not yet decided to marry. Daniel always considered himself one of the most real men. When he was young, he enthusiastically pumped his muscles. In his opinion, he wasn't stupid either. In short, the perfect man. After a year of married life, Carol and her high-mindedness began to annoy him. Daniel didn't want to waste his time with such nonsense. All this talk about life, about how to make it better for everyone. It wasn't for him. Well, and then, about 3 years later, when Carol had developed a bent on moving to the city, the young man finally realized that he'd done something wrong. It wasn't Daniel's policy to admit his mistakes. A real man couldn't make mistakes. But a couple more months passed, and Daniel clearly realized that something had to be done. He'd had his eye on one at work a long time ago. Lenora was living with Wade at the time. She was a beautiful and hard-working woman, so Daniel began to pursue her. They hit at first. Daniel had a car, so it was easy. Then Daniel started making jealous scenes to get his lover to break up with her roommate. Basically nothing new. A word or two about Daniel's mother. It's not that Tracy hated Carol. No, it's just that she'd always felt she was the wrong kind of wife for Daniel. Carol wasn't exactly a looker. Her overly skinny body and salt black hair didn't evoke the emotions that usually came from seeing a beautiful woman. And when Tracy learned that her son was looking at Lenora, she didn't mind at all. Carol's fate had been decided behind her back. She'd hoped she and her husband would go to the big city and have children. Lenora clung to her lover, wanting certainty. And for that, Daniel had to go through with the divorce. The sooner the better. The man himself couldn't stand his wife anymore either. She had become repugnant to him. Daniel, in the evening, Carol came up to him and said, "I want to talk to you." She was very worried. "Not tonight," he objected immediately. "Carol, may I? Did you get any sleep tonight? I still can't get over last night." "Daniel, I can't take it anymore," she shouted. "You're not paying attention to me. What's the matter?" "It's nothing," he threw coldly. "I'm tired. It's not like I'm a robot. I can't take a day off on a whim like you do." "Do you love me?" the wife asked provocatively. "Carol, answer me. Did you decide to finish me off today?" After all, jumped the husband out of bed and began to dress. "Where are you going?" Carol rushed to him in tears. "To my mother's, at least to sleep at her place." "She doesn't nag me as much as you do." He said goodbye and disappeared into the yard. During the night, Carol was restless. The next day in the evening, she decided to drive to her husband's work. She waited till morning. It was gray, unkind. The work was hard. There weren't many people because it was raining. Carol closed her stall and hailed a cab. She tangled herself in her raincoat and waited. Daniel worked until 6. His wife waited for him, stood nearby and watched as her husband came out of the gate, followed by some strange woman. She sat in the front seat and began kissing him passionately. Carol couldn't move. She sat down and cried loudly. The car had long since left and she still couldn't get up. "Daniel," she called her husband an hour later, "we need to have a serious talk with you. I've seen you. So stop making a fool of me." Her husband was silent, disconnecting the phone. Carol tried many more times to dial him, but he blocked her number. "Bastard," Carol screamed. "What a coward you turned out to be. You've never been a real man, only lip service, just shaking your muscles senselessly." Carol was exhausted that night. She hadn't slept much the night before to do anything about it. She took a sedative, fell asleep. She woke up to the phone ringing, her alarm clock going off. She could barely get up. No sooner had she opened her stall than Kyle came rushing toward her on his bike. He looked very excited. "Carol, I did it," he said. "I gave Mom her first shot, and she's feeling better." "Congratulations," she said dryly. She was in so much pain she didn't want to see anyone. "Did something happen to you?" Carol's classmate tossed his bike. "It's nothing much," she said through tears. "It's just that I'm going to be filing for divorce." "Did you and Daniel have a fight?" As if he wanted to be supportive of his friend. "Carol, I can help you with that." "Kyle? With what?" She covered her face with her hands. "Will you make me forget that he has a mistress and that he cheated on me?" "Here you go. Give this to your mom." She held out some buns in a bag. "Come over tonight after work," Kyle suggested. "You need a detached look at all this." Carol didn't say anything back to him, shrugging her shoulders. She just wanted to stop living at that moment. Daniel still didn't answer either. Carol called her parents, explaining everything to them. "Carol, get your things and come and visit us," her mother told her immediately. "How I didn't want your Daniel. He thought too highly of himself." And so he was. Not a man, but a wimp. Can't even admit his betrayal. And Daniel was actually very nervous. That was the real reason he hadn't filed for divorce yet. He didn't want to be seen as a scumbag in other people's eyes. But how to frame his wife? He hadn't figured it out until now. Now everyone would know he had a mistress. At work, they'd somehow managed to keep it quiet until the last moment. Daniel's mother had made up a legend that Lenora was a distant relative of theirs. And so Daniel often gave her a ride home. They never took liberties in public at the warehouse, and they rarely spoke at all. So from this side, Daniel looked like a decent family man and took care of his relatives. Tracy was often late for work. Then the three of them would drive home. Daniel swore the last words at Carol to himself. He really didn't want the gossip. Everything was going according to plan. His mother had promised to help him get rid of his wife. Carol seemed to feel her husband cursing her. She walked toward the house, but then abruptly turned around and headed to visit Kyle. Carol greeted her classmate's mother cheerfully. "It's so good to see you," the guest froze in place. She couldn't believe her eyes. No, Lenora wasn't walking yet, but she looked much better. "Can you imagine? The pains are gone," she reported contentedly. "I was so scared, and Kyle was too. Carol, but what have I got to lose? 5 more years of being in a wheelchair and then going to the other side of the world. I'm still afraid to believe in that miracle." Carol and Kyle walked to the workshop. The man sat down in a chair. He was overwhelmed with emotion, such joy that he couldn't even express it. "Carol, I consulted someone," Kyle began. "True, it's not a doctor, it's a biochemist. But anyway, he told me it's a very promising field. Something like growing bones, only not from stem cells, but from the cells of the bone itself. First, this substance fills the problematic joint. Then it expands the space a little bit and starts to fit into it. This somehow provokes the growth of new cells. I don't even know how to explain it scientifically." "Do you want to continue your experiment?" Carol inquired. "Carol, it seems very promising to me. I'd have to get my mother back on her feet," he sighed. "Serious research takes money, and I don't have any. I'm already denying myself everything to buy everything I need. I even needed high-grade gold for the rig." "But if you get a patent," Carol suggested, "then you could implement your invention." "Who's going to give it to me? That takes serious research, not knee-jerk like mine. If I could find sponsors. But in our city, it is simply impossible. We either have beggars like me or businessmen in the market. And these comrades are not interested in their future anyway. They don't even want a better life for their children. They live for one day, just to make more money." And yet Carol had the feeling that something would change. She returned home in high spirits. She felt like her life was making sense to her now. Carol was eager to study with Kyle, and the first thing she wanted to do was contact someone at her institute for advice. One faculty member she had once been good friends with, but that would come later. For now, the woman needed to pack her things and move in with her parents. Carol saw that her husband wasn't home. She rushed into one of the rooms and started packing her bags. The pain came over her again, and she dropped everything and lay down on the bed to calm down. Then she heard a noise. She threw her bag into the closet and hid in the corner behind the curtain. She didn't want to see Daniel so badly that some childish instinct kicked in. Someone was talking at the door, and Carol immediately recognized her mother-in-law and her husband. "Just throw my jewelry in her drawer," Tracy was saying. "And then I'll file a police report. Let them know I suspect her. Your wife turned out to be a thief. I mean, she's been visiting me, and everyone knows it." Carol opened the door, turned on the recording on her phone. The husband and mother-in-law were so startled they couldn't get a word out. "So that's it," Carol angrily threw. "Not only did you scoundrels confuse me, but you also wanted to slander me. But no more. Listen here. Everyone will know what you are and what your son is, and he's no different from you. He's a bastard like you." "Shut your mouth," Daniel lunged at her. "I'll have you now," he swung around. "Everything that happens here is seen by Kyle on his phone. He bugged me." Carol made up a story as she went along. "So any movement you make and the police will be right there." Daniel ran out of the house, followed by his mother. Carol, of course, hadn't heard that Tracy wasn't going to have her son share the house with her, as that was a topic they had discussed before the jewelry was planted. Her mother-in-law's jewelry would become a tool for their blackmail. Carol would then easily give up her share. Daniel thus accomplished 2 things at once. He got out clean, because now Carol was to blame for the divorce. And secondly, he was taking all the property. He pulled up sharply in front of his mother's yard. She got out and he drove to his mistress. "How I hate you so much," he whispered. "Stupid, you ruined everything." He pounded his fist on the steering wheel. Daniel stepped on the gas. He only had a couple of kilometers to go to get to Lenore. A corner appeared, and Daniel suddenly slammed into a pole at full speed. The car was a pile of metal in an instant. Everything swirled before Daniel's eyes, and he lost consciousness. "No," screamed Tracy Alexandra as her son was overtaken by instant punishment. She walked around with crazy eyes and told everyone how her daughter-in-law had cast a spell on her and Daniel. She wanted to kill him, found a lover, and thought to get rid of my boy that way. How are such people incapable of admitting their guilt? And Tracy Alexandra has always been convinced of her uniqueness. Mistakes are for the weak. That's how she raised her son. He could look down on everyone forever, make fun of others. But there's always a price. Daniel came to. His mother was sitting beside him, crying. She had already argued with all the doctors, demanding that her son be brought back to life. Though she had been warned that if Daniel did regain consciousness, he would most likely remain disabled. I mean, how's that no walking? Tracy Alexander jumped up from her chair in the doctor's office. It's your responsibility to get him on his feet. But I'm not the Lord God, replied the doctor. Besides, you can arrange in New York for money to have him operated on. We don't do such complicated operations in our city. There are no such specialists. So it's up to you. Tracy Alexander shouted at the entire hospital, threatening the prosecutor's office. Come on, bring the prosecutor, I'll show him in what conditions we work. Maybe they will at least raise our salaries. Calmly replied the doctor. Tracy Alexandra was shaking, but she didn't realize that the doctors had already done everything they could. Daniel had survived, and already that could be called a miracle. After a few days, they allowed his mistress to visit the patient. She cried, and then decided to talk to the doctor. Are you sure that nothing can be done? I beg you, maybe we can find some kind of cure. Unfortunately, there is no such magic pill, the doctor sighed. Prepare for the worst. He won't walk. He has serious problems with his spine. The mistress fell to the floor. She hadn't counted on this outcome at all. Lenora found herself in a very difficult position. For almost a week she thought about her future, and then she made a decision. Wade. Hi, she dialed her ex-boyfriend. I'm so sorry, Lenora cried, fake tears. I only love you. Let's get back together. Tracy Alexandra was also thinking hard. She was counting on Lenora in this situation. Daniel would get the house in the divorce. So they already had a place to live, she reasoned. I would visit them from time to time, help her out. The next day at Tracy's work, Alexandra wanted to have a serious talk with Daniel's mistress. Lenora, can I talk to you for a minute? She approached her. My girl, I don't think you're going to have any more problems with housing. You and Daniel can stay at his place or yours. It's just that if you take him in, you can sell the house and pay for the treatment. The doctor said he might get his back working and my boy will at least be able to ride in a wheelchair. Lenora laughed. Tracy Alexandra, you'll have to excuse me, but I can't. Somehow going pale, break Daniel. Lenora, are you abandoning my son? I mean, he loves you so much. Tracy Alexandra. You see, Wade came back to me, she smiled crookedly. So we're living together now. You took him back, Tracy Alexandra whispered. Lenora, how could you do that? And my boy. She sobbed. But Lenora wasn't about to change her plans. As long as Daniel had been healthy, everything had been fine. But now that he was an invalid, why would she want to ruin her life? Loving someone else is important, of course. But you can't love yourself any less. It's always me that comes first for people like Lenora. It was very hard for Tracy Alexandra to admit defeat. Things had spiraled so fast she'd forgotten all about her sister-in-law. But it was getting to her. The few times she'd gotten to Daniel's house, his wife hadn't been home. What am I going to tell her? Tracy Alexandra was working out a plan in her head. It's not like she's going to listen to me. I have to come up with something so she can't say no to me. The mother drove to her son's house almost every day. She was tired of running back and forth. Mom, why isn't Lenora coming? Daniel asked her one day. Why don't you ask her to come over and see me? I miss her. Daniel, she said as gently as possible. Do you understand? And Lenora's gone. Her mom's sick, so she has to live in the village for now. Tracy Alexandra realized that she couldn't tell Daniel yet that Lenora had left him. It might make things worse for him. Mom, call her, he asked. Please. I want to hear her voice so badly. Tracy Alexandra was confused. She left the room and dialed Lenora. I'm begging you, well, play along with him, she cried. If he finds out now that you left him, God forbid. Well, okay, I'll say a few words to him. And that's it, the ex-lover replied angrily. If Wade finds out, he'll kill me. Lenora wasn't as affectionate as she'd been before. But Daniel was somewhat relieved. Mom, did you see her? His face turned contemptuous. I don't even want to bring her up, but we need to settle on a house. I think I'll be divorced easily now. I'll probably recover for another 6 months, and then I'll go back to work. My mother didn't say anything. She knew that it would be impossible to realize all his dreams. Okay, I'll talk to her, she sighed. Daniel, let's talk about this later, after you've been discharged. Tracy Alexandra urgently needed to get Carol back. Hanging her disabled son around her neck was not for her. In words alone, Tracy Alexandra could be the perfect mother, but spending the rest of her old age caring for a sick person was too much. Carol was screaming all over the house. She couldn't take it anymore. She'd never met such mean people before. She was putting her things in a bag. In fact, Carol was in such an agitated state that she could not control herself. Finally, her hysteria ended and tears were shed. After that, the woman felt lighter. I hate it, she whispered. Carol carried some bags outside and hailed a cab. Her mother had already called several times. She was frantically worried about her daughter. No sooner had Carol laid out her things than she was called. Yes, she said angrily. She had no time to talk. The phone interrogated her first and last name. Your husband was in an accident? She was suddenly informed. He's in intensive care. The chances are slim. Carol was numb. She couldn't even believe what she was hearing at first. Mom, he was in an accident, she said quietly, and rushed over to her. Of course, Carol was very angry with Daniel, but she didn't wish him dead. Are you going to go to him, Mom asked. Her daughter immediately shook her head negatively. Mom, what's the point of all this? He doesn't love me. He has a mistress. Let her worry about him. Carol wiped away her tears. Be that as it may, Carol still wanted to visit her husband, but she held herself in check. Why? She was talking to someone in her head. If he doesn't want me, she still had feelings for Daniel, and Carol couldn't hide it. But in the situation they were all in, her coming would have looked just plain stupid even in her own eyes. She had to deal with her feelings on her own. Still, she'd talked to Daniel's doctor. She drove to the hospital early one morning before work. He'll remain disabled, the doctor said. How's the verdict? Unfortunately, there is serious damage to his spine. Since Carol now lived far from where she worked, she, like many in her town, rode her bicycle. Kyle rode up to her. Carol, come see us if you can. Really need your advice, Carol. Daniel's been in an accident, she couldn't stand it and cried. He's going to be an invalid now. You're going back to him now, consternation showed on Kyle's face. Carol noticed how his voice trembled. No, she shook her head negatively. He has another woman, and he doesn't care about me at all. The man picked up the bread and pastries and went about his business. Carol watched him go. Yes, the old jacket Kyle seemed to have worn as a teenager, the shoes with holes in them. As a classmate had told her, he didn't spend the money from his mother's pension, and that's what they lived on. And whatever he managed to earn or sell, he put into his rig. Why is that? Carol sighed. Those who live only for themselves prosper, and those who do their best for others are dragging out a miserable existence in poverty like this. Despite the pain, Carol decided to go out and accept her friend's invitation. It had been almost 2 weeks since Kyle had first administered the medicine to her mother. They hadn't seen each other much since then. Kyle said he had been very busy with work the whole time. Carol walked into her friend's house. He was smiling. It was obvious that he knew about something, and the guests obviously had no idea about it. The woman entered the room and froze in place. Standing by the window was Kyle's mother on crutches. God, how is this possible? She whispered. Come out. Kyle walked toward her. Amber Adams demonstrated a few tentative steps. Carol looked at Kyle in bewilderment. Is this a joke? She was overwhelmed with emotion. Kyle, you can't believe it. It's true. He walked over to his mother and hugged her. Well, I'll tell you honestly, if Mom recovers, we'll certainly lose something, he laughed. but I'm willing to work and compensate Mom for her pension. I'll go to work myself. If I move normally, right away, the woman replied. For so many years, I don't want to sit any longer. The young people chatted till nearly 3 o'clock. This event was a big deal to both of them. Then Kyle walked Carol home. Or rather, they rode their bikes home together. And then he came home. Carol went to bed. She thought about the patience and stamina it took not to break down like that. And Kyle, he said, had been failing for years. He'd quit for a couple months, and then, it would be like an impulse from inside him to get up. He'd get back on track, her friend told her. Carol herself felt that now that she was free, she could do something useful. She would really like to support Kyle first. If I could find someone interested. She sighed. Then Kyle would have a chance at life. If he paid good money for the patent, it could be enough for him for years to come. Maybe someone else would invest in the invention. He had so many ideas. But again, it all came down to finances. The teacher Carol contacted told her right away that government organizations were unlikely to be interested in such a thing. They wanted everything for free. So you have to look for someone from serious businessmen. And where will you find them, these businessmen? She whispered frustratedly. It's one thing to be in New York, but it's another to be in a province like this. The next day prepared new adventures for Carol. Around 10, Tracy's mother-in-law, Alexandra, approached her stall. Panting with anger, Carol tried to be as friendly as possible. We could talk to you, she smiled for emphasis. Carol thought it would be about the divorce or the division of the apartment, since those were still open to her. So she agreed. There were no visitors, and the woman stepped outside. She crossed her arms over her chest and waited. Carol, her mother-in-law, sighed. You misunderstood us last time. You see, she seduced my son. It was obvious she was struggling with every word. Anyway, she's been blackmailing him, threatening Daniel. She's got some man. I'm pretty sure he's the one who beat up my son 3 days before that accident. Lenora stated that if Daniel didn't bring her gold jewelry as a gift, Tracy Alexandra held her handkerchief to her mouth. My son would be stabbed to death. We wanted to make it look like you had my jewelry that she wanted. Like you'd taken it. Carol clearly sensed that her mother-in-law was trying to put her in a state of pity for her and Daniel. She even began to sympathize with her husband. Emotions overwhelmed her and she stopped thinking rationally. Okay, stop, she said to either herself or Tracy Alexandra. Now, don't make a fool of me. I wonder how it's possible to blackmail a man into sleeping with someone. That can only happen by free will. Did she tie him up, rape him? Tracy Alexandra was silent. She tried to catch a single sensible thought in her head, but she was having none of it. Carol, but I'm begging you. You don't leave him. Daniel loves you very much. He keeps asking, when are you going to visit him? I'm begging you. Her mother-in-law was still looking at her. But as far as I'm concerned, your son doesn't want a mistress. And you do now, Carol laughed. I'm always amazed at people like that. How can you be such a creature? I mean, you're nothing. How loudly you shout it, my Daniel, what's the problem? So you look after him yourself. Carol, well, you must realize that I'm not young anymore, she said in an angelic voice. I don't have the strength to visit him. One thought occurred to Carol, and that would be the last thing she would do for him. Tracy Alexandra cheered up. She didn't understand what Carol was talking about then, and Carol wouldn't talk to her again. To her delight, people approached. Tracy Alexandra almost sent her an air kiss out of joy. After work, Carol drove to Kyle's house. He was tinkering in the workshop as usual. Sitting on the bench was Amber Adams. She was happy, smiling, and greeted Carol. Oh, look, I walked with crutches. Much better today, she said. Carol hugged her with delight. Kyle watched them from the sidelines. He was very pleased that his mother liked Carol. Shall we go? He waved to his guest. There's something else I want to show you. Kyle, could you help me? Carol asked seriously. Do you think your stuff could help Daniel? Well, he scratched his head. I can't say for sure. But if you think about it theoretically, yes. I mean, Mom's bones are regenerating, and so are tendons and nerve connections. Could you help him? Carol looked hopefully into his eyes. If he agrees. All right, Kyle answered without much enthusiasm. I'll do it for you. Carol didn't pay much attention to his last words. It wasn't that she wanted to go on living with Daniel, but she clearly felt that she had to give him the chance. "Thank you," Carol suddenly ran up to the man and kissed him on the cheek. Kyle blushed. He went out of his workshop under the pretense of taking something, rushed into his room and collapsed on his bed. He was very afraid that someone might find out about his secret. "Well, are you ready?" After a minute, he entered the workshop again. "Carol, come on, look at this." He opened an old notebook with yellowed pages. "This is a plate that is supposed to generate special radiations. Its power is small, but unlike those that now exist, such radiation should deliver the drug to the bloodstream without any interference." "Are you saying that it is possible to somehow transfer the medicine into a vein without a syringe?" Carol opened her mouth in surprise, but Kyle was pleased with her reaction. "Carol, it's all about the radiation. It sort of takes the particles of any drug and delivers them to the right place. Rex has already experienced the benefits of this new method." Carol laughed. What was Oscar injecting him with? He was very pleased by the way Kyle laughed. "It's all about the plate. It requires a special alloy. Then I coated it several times with different liquids. I have another idea. But it would require special equipment, very thin plates of quartz with other materials layered on top of them. I definitely can't do that here. The plate that I have, so far, delivers only 50 to 60% of the drug. So that's a start, too." Carol looked at this thin, unremarkable man and marveled at his intelligence. He spoke so simply about such serious things, talking about his mistakes and unprofessionalism. "Kyle, you're a genius." Carol couldn't take it anymore. She kept her eyes on him. The man blushed. "I don't know anything at all," he mumbled. "There are such luminaries, I'm no match for them." "You're wrong," he said, and that struck a nerve with her. "I'm proud to have you as a friend, and I'm sure you'll accomplish a lot." "I'd like to get my mom back on her feet," he said sadly. "Of course, it's a miracle what's happening now. But I'd like to see her walking freely in the yard, growing her favorite flowers." "Kyle, I want to get her something." Carol's eyes lit up. "I'll bring her some seedlings and some flower seeds." "I don't know anything about that," he smiled. "I'd really appreciate it if you'd look into it." It was one of the best evenings they had ever had as friends. Kyle saw Carol off. Late. "Carol, thank you." A friend said goodbye to her. "I wouldn't have succeeded if it weren't for your support. I really appreciate it." He lowered his head. "Kyle, you're a very good friend too, and I feel like you underestimate yourself," Carol replied. Carol touched his hair. Kyle got on his iron horse and rode toward home. His heart was singing. It was May outside. The next day, Carol wanted to go to her husband's house from work. Of course, there was great anger in her heart, but she realized that she would never take revenge, especially not if Kyle's drug could help him. There were no harmful substances in it. Any doctor would have said it wouldn't work. But as Kyle himself had said, it wasn't so much the composition that was the main thing here, but the process of getting it. Carol tossed the guests into her bag, got on her bike. She didn't know how she was going to talk to Daniel, or even if the dialogue would take place. Carol waited a moment to catch her breath. She went over in her head what she was going to say to her husband. She looked into the room, and there was nothing there. That was the most important thing. Carol really didn't want to meet her mother-in-law. And Daniel was awake. You could tell by the look on his face that he was thinking about something. Lenora had told him that she wouldn't be coming to see him in the next few months. Daniel got some kind of strange premonition. "What are you doing here?" he asked his wife in horror. His cheekbones shifted nervously. "Go away. I don't want to see you." "Daniel, let's talk to you," Carol said calmly. "We're adults." "This is all your fault. Is it your fault that I'm lying here right now?" Daniel accused his wife. "Daniel, come on. You know that's a lie." She tried to calm him down. "I can help you." He laughed to devalue Carol. "You've accomplished nothing in your life except your stall. Kyle invented a special drug that helps your bones get back to normal. It's perfectly safe," the wife began. "I don't want to hear about that quack. Although I'm not surprised you cheated on me with him. You're both assholes." Daniel shouted, drool flying from his mouth. "Get out, Tahir. I wish Kyle would die sooner. That penniless hobo on his prehistoric bicycle." "Daniel," he lifted his mother. "She's been in a wheelchair for years." "This is your chance." Carol tried to ignore his profanity. "Go away," Daniel shouted, and his red face said he was in a very emotional state. A nurse came running in and asked her guest to leave. Carol saw Daniel turning his head from one side to the other and shouting something. "What did his pumped-up body give him?" sighed the wife. "His psyche is so weak that his muscles could never compensate for that loss." Carol was genuinely sorry that Daniel had refused her help. She realized that it was unlikely that his mother would mess around with him. She'd already hinted at it when they'd met. "It's his choice," Carol whispered. "I did the best I could. His accident wasn't my fault. I never cheated on him." 2 days later, Carol's mother-in-law came to work again. She was no longer asking her to go back to her son. "Carol, I think you need to take Daniel's situation seriously," she said. "I'm asking you to give him the house. I can't cure him on my own." "Okay," Carol agreed. "But on one condition: you'll never be in my life again." Tracy Alexandra agreed. After the tantrum her son had thrown at her about Carol, she had no more requests or complaints for her. When Daniel's mother started this game, she felt like a real queen. But every game comes to an end sooner or later. And the one who seemed at the beginning to have every chance to win, by the end of the game lost. Everyone had made their choice. Even the accident didn't break Daniel's pride. Who knows, maybe thanks to Kyle he could have stood up, but that would have been beyond the realm of dreams. Because men like Daniel would never reach out to men like Kyle. It's beneath their dignity. It was painful to recognize that Daniel's life had no value, as he lived only for himself. And such crazy romantics, dreamers who look like fools from the outside, are capable of moving mountains. And so ended the story of Carol and her husband. After that, the woman was never again interested in Daniel's life. He was rumored to be living with his mother. A few days later, Carol met with Kyle. The man gave her a very strange look. "So are you going to help him?" Breathlessly, he asked. For Kyle, you could say it was a matter of life and death. "No, he rejected our help," she smiled faintly. "Kyle, I don't want to talk about this anymore." "I'm all for it," he cheered. "Carol, Mom made her first cake today. She really wants you to come over for a visit." "Okay," she promised Kyle. "Tell her I'll be there." Kyle's invitation lifted her spirits. Carol worked through her day so effortlessly, as if she were being held above ground by some force. "You're glowing today," customers told her. "You're in a good mood." Carol nodded at them. She really did feel happy, as if a heavy weight had been lifted off her shoulders. The evening had been so wonderful that Carol didn't even want to go home. It seemed to her that this was where she belonged. They sat in the workshop after tea. Kyle stared at his guest. His lips moved as if he were saying something. "Carol," he said quietly. "I'm like, how do I say this?" The woman stepped closer to him and stroked his face with her hand. "I love you," Kyle finally said. "I love you too," she kissed him. "I want to be your muse," the woman whispered. "We'll do everything together. I'll help you with everything." "Thank you," he touched her hair. "Carol, I'm as lucky as Rex. I'll have not only a wife, but a friend and a companion." "I believe in you," Carol said. "You will succeed. Kyle, you're a genius. You have to admit it." "I'll try," he said timidly. "I'm not afraid of anything with you." The man breathed in the scent of her hair and couldn't believe he could be so happy. 7 years had passed. "Kyle, we're here," came from the backyard. "Are you home?" Carol headed toward her husband's huge workshop. On the way, she stopped and looked at the beautiful garden. She and Kyle had managed to find a sponsor back then, after all, and Kyle had made some very good money. They had bought a 2-story house with a large lot. Amber Adams was on the first floor. She ran the garden. Carol took care of the children, but most of the time they all spent together in the lab at Dad's house. Carol gave birth to a son almost a year after she registered. And when he turned 3, they had a yearling daughter and another boy. In general, as Carol predicted, Kyle became not only a scientist but also a caring father. And despite his crazy busy schedule, he made time for his children. Now, many years later, the man was again working on the development of non-contact administration of drugs by means of special radiation. There was a businessman who invested good money in his invention. And since Kyle couldn't live without his inventions, of course he agreed. Dad. His oldest son ran into his workshop. We're back. Oh, I hadn't heard his father jumped up. How was your vacation? Did you enjoy it? Yes. Grandma didn't even want to get out of the pool, Oscar laughed. Why did he open his mouth in curiosity? I'll tell you all about it later. His father took him in his arms. Let's go to Mommy first. Hi, her husband hugged Carol. I see the kids are excited about the water park, he smiled. I don't know about the kids, but I sure am. Amber Adams laughed. I'll have something to tell you about tomorrow at work. I wish you could have come with us. Carol touched her husband's hair. Next time, I promise. He put his arm around her waist. But my muse, it's time to inspire me. Mom, there's something we need to discuss in the workshop. Could you watch the kids for half an hour? I promise I'll tell you all about it tonight. He smiled as the kids puffed up their cheeks. Amber Adams stared after them. She couldn't even believe that almost 7 years ago she'd been practically unconscious. And now, thanks to her son, she could not only live a full life but make up for lost time. Go to the bank and get a loan for me. She was numbed by her mother-in-law's words. Eric is probably not that bad, he grumbled to himself. Jean froze on the doorstep of her son's apartment. Eric had been traveling for a week and had asked his mother to stop by, pick up some important documents, scan them, and send them to him. If his wife Madison had been home, he wouldn't have disturbed Jean. But Madison had gone to visit Betty's mother, whom she hadn't seen in years. Even for her daughter's wedding, Betty couldn't attend because of the predictions. Later, Betty's condition improved, but she still had a lot of time on her hands. Then her son got sick, then one thing, another. And time went by. Betty wasn't young, but she still wanted to see her daughter, who'd been living in another city for a long time. So Madison went to visit her while her husband was away on business and her son was at camp. The young woman had plenty of time to be with her relative. Forgot, damn it, he grinned. Completely slipped my mind. Slipped out, he grinned. I've been working too hard. It's a nightmare. I was going to call Madison. It slipped out that she wasn't home either. Pick it up, scan it, and mail it to me. If it's not too much trouble. I'm sorry I had to bother you like this. I didn't expect this myself. It wasn't hard for Jean to help her son. Eric has always been, is, and will always be the most important thing in a woman's life. The meaning of her existence, not otherwise, because Jean had no one else but her son. She separated from her husband when Eric was very young and has not seen him since. The husband, of course, did not pay alimony and was not interested in his son's life, which, however, was more of a plus than a minus. Jean really did not want her husband to participate in the upbringing of her boy. She was afraid that Eric would follow in his father's footsteps and grow up to be the same irresponsible and lazy freak. But fortunately, this did not happen. Eric was very sensitive and attentive, grew up a normal, kind guy, did not grab stars from the sky, but did not sit idly by. True, he couldn't get into the university, he didn't have enough points. And Jin had no money for her son's education, and there was nowhere to get it from. Eric was not too upset about it. He reassured his mother it's nothing. He grinned when Jean, almost crying, apologized to her son. The woman was ashamed that all her life she had lived almost in poverty, working 3 jobs and not seeing the light of day, and still could not give her son all the best. She didn't even have money for paid education, not to mention real estate and other things available only to the children of the rich. For someone like Eric, they were a pipe dream. But unlike his mother, he was never discouraged. Poverty didn't bother him at all. Small is not small, he used to say. And about education, Eric considered it pointless. Mom, but who sits in these universities now? He pondered, convincing Jean. Who needs it? You're right, only rich kids have time to sit around for 5 years. I, for example, do not have such time. And I'm not interested in it. After school, Eric went straight to work. He was not taken into the army for health reasons, and it was as if a stone had fallen from Jean's shoulders. Thank God, son. I was so worried, she wailed. What else could she do? her only son, her own blood, and there would never be another, and no one could bring him back if anything happened. Until then, Eric's fate was quite favorable, which could not but please his mother. Eric grew from a bartender to a restaurant manager and began to receive a fairly decent salary. As soon as his career became certain, Eric thought about starting a family, which caused a storm of emotions and worries in Jean. The future daughter-in-law did not impress the woman properly. "Why do you need a country girl, son?" her mother wailed when Eric walked his Madison home after the formal family dinner. "She's even younger than you, and she doesn't even know where she came from. I don't know what kind of person she is. In short, she's kind of suspicious. At least that's what I thought." "Mom, I didn't grow up in a palace." Either Eric laughed, surprised that his mother was so concerned about Madison's background. "And we got the apartment from my grandmother. Just lucky. We were born here. And she's a long way from the metropolis. But that doesn't mean she's any worse than you or me. We have something in common: poverty. Madison is very hardworking and strives for a better life. I'm sure she and I will have a strong family." Eric met his future wife in the same restaurant where he worked. Madison immediately appealed to him. Such a purposeful and active girl could not remain without the attention of the young manager. Therefore, their relationship developed rapidly, as far as possible. This could not help but embarrass Jean, who was shocked when her son told her that he had known Madison for only a few months. "So, you're going to marry her already?" she exclaimed. "You've known a girl for a week and you're ready to drag her to the registry office? You should at least find out who her parents are, what they're like. What if they're alcoholics or worse? I'll have good grandchildren, I can't tell you that. I've dreamed of grandchildren like that my whole life." Madison didn't like to talk about her family. Every time Eric tried to start a conversation about it, she changed the subject. He understood that there was no telling what she might be going through. After all, he wasn't going to marry her relatives. He was going to marry her. Blinded by love, Eric thought Madison was the perfect girl of his dreams: beautiful, smart, determined. He didn't need another bride. He paid no attention to his mother's words. A few weeks after he proposed to Madison, the chief told Eric about his new career prospects. "I'm going to be expanding my network." John Smith shared his plans. "I think you could help me with that. You've been working for me for so many years, serving me faithfully, so to speak. You can be trusted by me and my institution. So I have an offer I'm sure you won't refuse. Let's talk about it. If you don't mind, of course. I wouldn't want to postpone such important matters." "How could you think that?" Eric grinned. "You know I'm always in favor, especially when it comes to work." "That's good," smiled John Smith. "Then come to my office in an hour and we'll talk and discuss further plans." Eric was happy when the chief informed him that he wanted to make him his confidant. At last he would have the job he had always dreamed of: traveling, negotiating, looking for places to open new locations in other cities. An amazingly interesting and busy life, and most importantly, a very decent salary. Of course, John Smith promised Eric a substantial fee. It's not just sitting in one restaurant. Compensation for the trouble must be motivating. Well, the chief winked. "So we've agreed on everything?" Of course, Eric nodded. "You have no idea how timely this is." Eric was just about to get married. He needed the money now. He needs to get an apartment. Madison and I weren't going to cramp my mom. That's the right thing to do, Eric reasoned. But I'd be careful with that girl if I were you. Well, so would you, sighed Eric, who didn't understand how Madison could be disliked. She was so wonderful, so amazing. And his mother's attitude toward her potential daughter-in-law was something Eric could understand. Jean was just jealous of her only son. She was afraid that once he married her, he'd drift away from her. At first, he would visit occasionally. Then communication would be limited to phone calls, and eventually they would become a luxury. The woman was just worried that she would be all alone. After all, she had no one but Eric. But what could be confusing in a girl with whom he did not even know? No one. Eric sincerely did not understand, so he did not develop this topic too much. He felt it necessary to ask carefully why Madison suddenly aroused such antipathy in him. Well, I've been around for a while and I've seen a lot of different people, he said meaningfully. I've learned to understand them. And I'll tell you something, Madison. Your girlfriend is very complicated. She never does anything for nothing. I'm guessing you're going to say. What's in it for her with me? If she wanted a favorable arrangement, she would have found herself some millionaire who sprinkled her with gold and the best resorts in the world took her. But if she's with you, then there is a benefit. And then it's a benefit. And then it's up to you to figure it out. As they say, you can't use your own head. Eric didn't take the words seriously at the time. Madison was too precious to him to look for flaws in her. And the girl didn't look like a cunning predator who came to megacities in packs every day in search of a better life. But it seemed so only at first glance. People with experience saw right through Madison. But not Eric. He was too naive and well-mannered. He'd spent his whole life riding up his mom's coattails. He grew up poor, but he was cared for and loved. He just couldn't see the bad in people. Madison didn't even know what Madison was after. Although the girl was indeed not a miss, but showed herself in all her glory much later, which left a deep wound on Eric's heart, which, as it seemed to him, will never heal. And everything had started out so well: wedding rings, traveling, buying an apartment, and plans for the near future. The moment Eric married Madison, he thought he was the happiest man in the world. Even Jean, who was quite skeptical of her son's family life, couldn't spoil his mood. Eric was elated and hoped that in the very near future his wife would give him a baby boy. It was time for him to become a father, and he didn't want to postpone this important event. Only Madison didn't show much initiative. To be more precise, she wasn't going to have a baby at all, and did everything she could to avoid getting pregnant. But she didn't tell Eric about it, of course. With all her might, the girl pretended that, just like him, worried about the lack of heirs. Allegedly ran to doctors, each of whom said the same thing, which Madison then, with a sigh, recounted to Eric. And he believed her and waited patiently for the moment when all the problems would be resolved. Eric didn't even realize that would never happen, because there were no problems. Madison couldn't stand children. She was allergic to infant crying and screaming. She herself had grown up in a large family, and instead of reading books, going out with friends, and doing useful things for herself, Madison had to babysit the younger ones her mother gave birth to. When Betty learned that her daughter had made a good deal, she was happy for her, but reminded her of the younger children, "Don't forget to send us some money. Just a little bit, but at least something. Rachel's shoes are worn out, and Anthony needs to get ready for school. You know I don't make that much." Madison thought to herself indignantly, "Did I really give birth so I could work for all of you?" She married out of a peculiar calculation. Initially, Madison realized that Eric could not provide her with a rich and luxurious life. But he had something important: he genuinely loved Madison and would do anything for her. Besides, Eric was a local resident and had his own apartment. He was a very favorable candidate for Madison, and it would be foolish to pass him up. If she married some fat rich man, she would be enslaved, and her whole life would be reduced to satisfying the whims of an old rich man. That was not Madison's plan at all. After the wedding, she was able to quit her demanding job and stay home. Eric hoped that Madison was about to give him a baby boy, and then a second and third child. He wanted a large and strong family, so he decided that Madison would take care of the house, the nest, and household issues. When buying an apartment, Eric did not skimp, took a large and spacious. This really upset Jean, who hated her daughter-in-law, but hoped that the young people would live with her. The apartment needed renovation, and she expected the newlyweds to do it. However, Eric wanted to live separately with his wife and hoped that his mother would understand him. "Mom, we cannot live with you under the same roof. You don't like Madison and are against our relationship. Sooner or later there will be conflict, and I don't want that. Besides, we want lots of kids. And you're not old enough, you need a vacation, not a baby crying at night." And so it was, only Jean was very afraid for her son and did not trust Madison. And as it turned out, with good reason. About a year after the wedding, the daughter-in-law never gave her son the long-awaited heir. Mother-in-law increasingly often asked uncomfortable questions: how and why. All this very annoyed Madison, who steadily drank birth control pills and prayed not to get pregnant. But contraception failed her. Madison went to great lengths to feign joy when Eric guessed she was pregnant because of her recent poor health. Until recently, Madison hadn't believed she was knocked up, writing it off as overwork. But when she discovered the delay, she was horrified to realize that she couldn't escape her fate. Termination of pregnancy was out of the question. Eric would have realized everything and divorced her. She had no choice. She had to register and pretend to be happy. "How long have I waited for this?" exclaimed Eric over the moon. Finally, the dream has come true. The long-awaited baby is about to be born. From this moment on, Madison and I will begin a new beginning in our relationship. Throughout her pregnancy, Madison had been feeling very ill, which made her disgusted mood even worse. Damn this pregnancy, she resented, complaining to her mother about feeling sick. May it all burn blue. I hate it. That's what these modern methods led to. Now my whole life is down the drain. I don't know what I'm going to do. I have no experience. This baby will be born soon, and I'll have to take care of it around the clock. Betty was horrified by her daughter's words. She hoped that these emotions were temporary and would pass soon. "Are you out of your mind, Madison?" she wailed. "Children, this is happiness. And there's no escape. You married a townie with an apartment, and now you're working your ass off. What else can I tell you?" Betty didn't attend her daughter's wedding. Madison asked her not to come. "But you realize that bringing all these people here, Rachel and Tyler, is going to raise questions," Madison reasoned. "It's not good for me, you know. Eric's mom can't stand me. And if she finds out I have a large family, it'll be the end of me. But it doesn't matter to you. You can look at the pictures later. And it's not going to be anything special. It's just a celebration with all the trimmings." Betty didn't have anyone to leave the kids with. So there was some truth to what her daughter said. And she didn't want to ruin Madison's personal life. Her future depended on it. Rachel and Tyler are no strangers to family. Madison did send money. And after she started dating Eric, the amount even increased a little. At that time, still future husband always gave her beloved pocket money, and she sent them to the family. Betty could not be happy, finally bought normal shoes for her brother and sister, clothes. "Thank you, my daughter," she wailed, almost crying. "Thank you for not forgetting your family. I don't know how to thank you." Madison wasn't doing all this for her mother, her brother and sister, but for herself. If it were up to her, she wouldn't give a dime to her family. But the girl was not ready to listen to the regular reproaches of her mother. So she gave Betty a little money for poverty, just so that she would not bother. And so it went on until the birth. With the birth of the child, Madison planned to change the established order and perhaps remove the mother from the maintenance, if because of her lies would not fall into a trap. After that, there was no way Madison was going to be without her mother's help. Although who would have thought that things would turn out this way? They say old love never rusts. Only in Madison's case, it wasn't love, it was entertainment. But still, it was better than nothing at all. After the arrival of his son, Eric worked even harder. Of course he did. How could it be otherwise? The happy father tried hard for the sake of his son's bright future, so that the boy by adulthood had an apartment, a car, and a good education. And Eric did not plan to stop there. As soon as Braden was born, he immediately started talking about a second child. But Madison had given herself her word that this was the first and last birth of her life, never again. She vowed to herself as she looked in the hospital restroom mirror. Eric was bouncing with happiness and delight, and Madison struggled to bring herself to hold her son to her chest. Her whole body ached. She struggled to move her legs and cursed the contraception that had failed her. "Doctor, do whatever you want," Madison begged when she finally managed to talk to a doctor. For a few days after the birth, the world revolved around little Braden, and no one cared about Madison's suffering. At least that's how it seemed to her. Deep down, she hated her son. The boy caused Madison absolutely no feelings or emotions other than disgust. "God, how awful this is," she muttered to herself under her breath, trying to get away from the difficult labor. She couldn't imagine how she had survived it all. However, after a while, Madison thanked fate for the fact that the birth of her son was given to her so hard. It turned out that because of several mistakes made by the obstetrician and the complexity of the whole process, she is unlikely to ever become a mother again. "You know, it happens," the doctor sighed regretfully. She had no idea how happy Madison was to hear those words. Of course, there was no 100% guarantee, and the girl planned to keep taking the pills. But it was at least something. She definitely wouldn't be able to take it again. It was so awful that Madison didn't even want to remember it. She asked the doctor not to say anything to her husband yet. She didn't know how Eric would react to the fact that this was likely to be the first and last time he became a father. He could get angry or make a scene and blame the doctors. Madison didn't want that, especially since the doctor wasn't saying anything definitive. Time will tell, she reasoned. We'll live to see. Maybe I'm being overdramatic, but I just couldn't not tell you. Madison really hoped the doctor's prognosis would come true. There has to be a holiday on my street after all. I should be able to breathe easy and free. I deserve it. Especially since the role of a mother of many children the girl has never enticed. Life at the ready, this is yes, but to reproduce like a rabbit, definitely not. It's not my thing. So Madison was convinced that Eric should have tempered his ardor. But since he was not ready for it, the circumstances were very much to the girl's advantage. Madison was only involved in her son's upbringing partly. To throw off her shoulders part of the responsibilities, she was even willing to tolerate her mother-in-law, who was genuinely happy about the birth of a grandson and regularly came to help her daughter-in-law with the child. Eric even offered his mother to temporarily move in with them. Well, why should you travel? He reasoned. Constantly have to travel. And so you get up and do as much as you like. Why not? Especially since your relationship with Madison seems to be on the mend. You're not even criticizing her as much lately as you used to. Jean just didn't want to upset her son. He would surely make excuses for his out-of-touch wife, such as saying that she was still young and inexperienced, so she didn't know how to take care of a child. Eric would never admit that Madison was a bad mother who didn't care about her son. A veil of happiness was covering his eyes, and the man just didn't see it. Jean, on the other hand, saw it all. She had a keen eye for such things. You can't fool an experienced woman. Madison had it all written all over her face. Just a glance and everything became clear at once. Only a lovesick and happy fool like Eric could ignore such obvious things. But that came with time. Jean was sure that sooner or later her son and daughter-in-law's relationship would crack. They were two different worlds. If Eric was a model family man, an honest, decent man, Madison was clearly a man of her own mind, and her soul was black. And someday Eric would see that, just so it wasn't too late. Jean didn't want to think about it. Such thoughts depressed her. Since Braden's birth, all her attention had been focused on her grandson. What happened to Madison was no longer of any importance to her. She wasn't helping her daughter-in-law, but her son, who was struggling to provide a decent living for his family. But despite the fact that Jean stopped reacting to Madison like a bull to a red rag, she absolutely refused to move in with him. She did not change her attitude toward her daughter-in-law and did not want to live with her under the same roof. Eric understood his mother's decision and did not insist. He was very grateful for her help. It can be considered that Braden grew up in the arms of Jean, who did everything that depended on her to ensure that her grandson had a prosperous childhood. When the child grew up, the woman often took him to visit her. Madison was all for it. The less time she had to spend on the child, the better. She had the opportunity to spend those hours on herself. And what could be better than a break from all that work? And her soul was begging for a break. And Madison saw her son as just that, a burden. She was very tired of him and could hardly hide her emotions from her husband, who, as it seemed to her, had completely withdrawn because of constant employment at work. And if he worked for his wife's wants and needs, Madison would not even say a word to him. But Eric wouldn't let her spend any extra money, saving it all for the future. Even to send some money to Betty, Madison had to save the money she'd been given by her husband and find a way. She hardly ever went into the details of her family's life. Meanwhile, her brother and sister were growing up and demanding more and more from their mother every day. They needed money for this, that, and the 10th. Once Betty hinted to her daughter that it would be a good idea to help with Rachel and Tyler's future, to which she said nothing and walked away from the conversation. "Let's not look that far ahead," Madison replied meaningfully to her mother. "When you asked if I could drag my brother and sister to the big city afterward, they're too young to talk about it. When they grow up, when they decide what their future plans are, then we'll talk about it." Madison thought to herself that no one had ever gotten her anywhere or helped her in any way, and for some reason she had to do it again. Or not again, but again. And then Greg showed up if he wasn't laden. He fell on Madison's head like a snowball and brought confusion into her relatively peaceful and trouble-free life. When the former lover, whom Madison dated in her distant youth, wrote to her on social media, she didn't even believe it at first. How did he find her? He'd been looking for her with a purpose. Recently, Greg more and more often remembered his first love. His personal life did not work out, his career did not work out either. And so Gregory was more and more often immersed in the memories of the distant past. Word of mouth got around and they agreed to meet. Madison decided why not. She hadn't even realized that Greg had moved to the big city, too. And it was the one she lived in. After all, they hadn't spoken in years. And this meeting was something she'd wanted at first purely out of curiosity. Madison wondered how the former beau was doing. But after a while, she realized that Greg could be a good entertainment for her. Her husband was constantly missing on his business trips, all the money he made. The son was almost constantly in the care of Jean, who loved her grandson very much. And since her mother-in-law considered Madison a bad mother, she tried as little as possible to give her the opportunity to spend time with her son. And the daughter-in-law was only too glad. There was more than enough time to cheat on her spouse, so she didn't hesitate. Just a few weeks after meeting Greg, she got involved with him. They met in a small rented apartment, in which the young man lived alone for several years. Madison hadn't even considered hiding, just took and left to her lover, dumping her son to her mother-in-law. And the mother-in-law hadn't asked her daughter-in-law any questions in a long time. Yes, and suspicions of Madison's behavior would not have caused Jean, if at some point daughter-in-law did not cross the line. "When are you going to invite me to your house?" Greg, to whom Madison had foolishly promised to invite him to visit, asked. She said that when Eric was on a business trip, she would invite Greg. Madison said, "I'd like to spend time in a normal apartment, not this dump." Greg didn't have money for rent or a hotel. He made an average salary. He lived better than he did in his hometown, but not luxurious. Greg wasn't about to splurge to spend time with a girl he'd once dated behind the garages. It would be too much for him. No amount of love for Madison would make him change his mind. "I'll invite you. I'll definitely invite you," Madison waved him off. "Only you'll be my former classmate, nothing more." "Got it." What, Eric might suddenly come back? Greg grinned. "Then maybe we shouldn't take any chances." "No, it's not that." Madison sighed, knowing her mother-in-law had the keys. The girl's act was as stupid as possible. Anyone else in her position would never have gotten involved in such a venture. But that day, when she and Greg had spontaneously secluded themselves in the marital bedroom, there was no sign of trouble. Eric was on a business trip. The son was at camp. Who would have thought her husband would forget the paperwork he so suddenly needed at home? Madison didn't even hear the door open. Her mother-in-law, on the other hand, knew what was going on right away. It was hard not to guess from the sounds coming from the room. Jean was furious. She was ready to burst into the room and kick her daughter-in-law out of the house. But she found the strength to calm down and look at the situation sensibly. It didn't take much intelligence to cause a scandal and destroy her son's family. Except that Eric would never forgive it. Jean knew that. So she decided to make the best of the situation for herself and her son. Instead of barging into the room where her daughter-in-law was having fun with her lover, Jean lurked in the kitchen. Madison and Greg would have come here sooner or later anyway. And that's when Jean would have a frank talk with her sister-in-law. It happened faster than the woman would have guessed. No sooner had her mother-in-law made tea than she heard footsteps in the hallway, and a moment later, curses pouring from her sister-in-law's mouth. "Oh, shit," Madison exclaimed when she saw her mother-in-law's boots in the hallway. Damn, disbelievingly forgot I hadn't locked the secret door. That's why Jean was able to open the door with her key. How could I?" Continued Madison's indignation, who was so confused she didn't know what to do next. Her thoughts were confused and she was overwhelmed with shame. The girl walked to the kitchen where her mother-in-law was sitting and drinking tea. Madison could not immediately find the right words to start a conversation. She realized that in the best case she would face a scandal and divorce. And at worst, it was scary to imagine what someone like Jean could do for the sake of her son. She will stop at nothing to avenge his suffering. That's why her mother-in-law's proposal sounded unexpected. For a few minutes she speculated about Eric's feelings and what such a situation might lead to. When Greg appeared in the doorway, the mother-in-law demanded that he leave. "You weren't called here," she exclaimed. "No shame, no conscience. Not only are you sleeping with another man's wife, you're interfering in the conversation. Greg, you really should leave now, Madison muttered, confused. Wait for me in my room, I'll talk to you in a minute. And then we'll pack up and leave together. The grief-stricken lover had nothing to do but obey. He was no less confused than Madison, because he had not expected it to turn out this way. Greg imagined what problems awaited his friend in life, and he didn't want to be a part of them. Madison was ready for everything, except for the fact that her mother-in-law would be so cynical about the situation and demand money for her silence. So, that's it? The mother-in-law said, looking Madison intently in the eye. Jean's tone did not bode well. So the girl froze, waiting to hear what she was so afraid of. And after all, divorce was not part of her plans at all. Next to Eric, Madison lived quite freely. He was constantly working, and despite the fact that he saved most of the money, still provided her with quite a comfortable life. Her mother-in-law took care of her son most of the time. It was a dream life, and Madison was in danger of losing it all. But she did. In return for her silence, her mother-in-law demanded a large sum of money, which Madison had no place to get. If you want to have fun, Jean said. As they say, bad things are easy, and you are not capable of anything else in this life. But my son mustn't suffer. If he did something stupid by getting involved with you, then my Eric doesn't have to be responsible for all your shenanigans. And I'm prepared to keep your affair from him. It will avoid a scandal and save your marriage. But in return, you'll owe me something, and don't take too long. I need the money as soon as possible. If I don't get it, I'll tell my son. Then you can kiss this apartment and your carefree life goodbye. And considering that you haven't worked or done anything for years, it's not hard to guess that you'll be left with nothing. You'll go back to the country, where you belong. Madison guessed why her mother-in-law needed such a large sum of money, but she didn't dare to say it. Where would I get that kind of money? She mumbled confusedly. You know, I don't have a penny. Eric handles all the finances in our family. Maybe you should ask him. Her mother-in-law laughed. Jean didn't know how to react to her daughter-in-law's absurd suggestion. If she could ask her son for money, she would definitely do it. And she had already tried many times. Mom, well, understand you, but I cannot invest such a large amount of money to repair your apartment. Justified the son. You know Madison and I have a baby. I'm saving every penny I can to buy another place to live. I have to think about my son's future, and by the way, your grandsons, you love Braden too, don't you? We should have sold the old place a long time ago. It's more profitable than fixing it up. You're not a stupid woman. You know that. And frankly, I'm amazed at your persistence. Jean would be happy to sell the apartment, but could not, because her late mother strictly forbade her to do so. When Alexander was alive, Georgia gave her daughter her word that she would never leave her inheritance in the hands of strangers. You see, this apartment is the whole meaning of my life with my father, said the woman. It was inherited from my late mother and must pass from generation to generation, while remaining in our family. It has a special energy, and the apartment itself is special. You just don't realize it yet, but in time you will. Jin really didn't understand. Her late mother's words were still a mystery to her to this day. What were these features of the inherited apartment that her mother was talking about? What was so special about it? And why Alexandra Georgia so did not want the dwelling to ever end up in the wrong hands? For the modern world, her desire was wild. Selling old apartments and buying new ones had long since become commonplace, and it was at least strange to cling to a property whose walls were about to fall off. But Jean had to do it. Since Jean could no longer live with the encroaching mold in the kitchen, bathroom, and wallpaper yellowed from dilapidation, she had to get the money for repairs somewhere. Jean even tried to take out a loan, but was turned down. Apparently the income is very small, she sighed to herself when she got home from the bank. And the age is not the same. The amount is large. Apparently they're afraid that I'll die and won't pay it back. Bastards. And Eric, on principle, did not want to spend on this junk. He bought a new home, and his mother's apartment was not needed for nothing. Just because Jean didn't want to sell it wasn't his problem. And it didn't mean Eric had to shell out the money to fix it up. The woman wasn't going to sit idly by. And the way things had turned out, it was the perfect excuse to get the money she needed. Jean had no doubt that her sister-in-law would get the money. People like her dig with their noses. but they'll get their way. Go to the bank, get a loan, she said, breaking the silence between them. I don't care. And at the same time to get a job, because not bad so settled on the neck of my Eric. You don't work, you don't raise your son? The boy's with me all the time. You will start to do something, if of course you want to keep the family. Finishing her tea, her mother-in-law declined, and Madison returned to her lover Greg's room, who by now was sitting fully clothed on the bed, perplexed. No, well, did you hear that? Exclaimed the girl indignantly. What an insolent woman. It's just lawlessness. And after all, always from herself so good and decent built, but in fact unscrupulous and unprincipled. A blackmailer. What am I supposed to do now? Where am I supposed to get such money? Should I steal it? This is out of the question. It's a nightmare. Greg didn't understand what was being said, as he hadn't heard Madison's conversation with her mother-in-law. But when his mistress brought him up to speed, the man had a plan, and a very cruel one at that, listening to which even Madison with her cynicism was a little confused. Don't be in a hurry to refuse. Greg said, you'd better think about my offer. We'll kill a lot of birds with one stone. We'll give your mother-in-law money for repairs, and you can leave your husband at any time. That's what you want, isn't it? If you didn't want a baby, you'd be hanging out with me right now. No, divorcing Eric and marrying Greg were not in Madison's plans at all. She was happy with the status quo, one man for life, another for bed. It was the way many married women lived, and she was no exception. Madison didn't want to get involved in such a risky venture with her lover, but only until she realized with horror that she had no choice but to heed Greg's advice and put his plan into action. Turning to credit organizations was absurd. Who would give a loan to someone who was unemployed? A quick and easy way to make money was the only way Madison could solve her problem, and after a few days she realized that she simply had no other choice but to accept. What are you so worried about? Greg reassured his mistress. You don't even have to do anything. I'll do everything myself. You, most importantly, agreed with your mom. Will she agree to help you? Of course she will, Madison sighed. Where's she supposed to go? On that fateful day, Jean was walking with Braden on the playground, as usual. Before she knew it, the poor woman had been hit on the head with something heavy. It was early in the morning, so there were no witnesses to the incident. As soon as Jean woke up, she immediately ran to look for her grandson. But the boy was nowhere to be found, and naturally no one had seen or heard anything. Braden liked to walk early in the morning. He was generally a very active and mobile child. He got up at dawn and went to bed very late. In a word, restless. And now he's gone. God, how can I look into my son's eyes? Sobbed Jean, sitting in the police station, where she went as soon as she realized that her own efforts to find her grandson will not lead to any results. You could use some help yourself, the investigator told her. Preferably medical help. Why didn't you call an ambulance? How long have you been lying in the street on the damp ground? You have a very serious head injury. You can't let this go unaddressed. What the hell kind of ambulance? Hit and run? Jean, are you kidding me? Don't you get it? My grandson's missing. My only grandson. And you and your doctors. Jean had to go to the hospital, but she refused to be hospitalized. She was in a hurry to see her daughter-in-law. Jean didn't know how to tell Eric what had happened, and she wanted to put Madison in charge. And at that moment, her mother-in-law didn't even realize that her daughter-in-law might have been involved in all of this. It was only when she arrived at Madison's house and found her sobbing over a note demanding a substantial ransom that she realized what was going on. At that moment, Jean was overcome with fear and her chest pinched with guilt. And damn it, said the poor woman, how the hell did I not realize it at once? That's how she decided to get the money. If I hadn't asked for it, Braden would have been all right. But Madison had no proof that her mother-in-law had anything to do with it, and she could hardly keep from hurling accusations at her. Eric was due back from another business trip any day now, and Jean was afraid to imagine what would happen when he found out. Madison was hysterical, smearing mascara on her face from her tear-stained eyes, wailing, wondering what to do next. We have to call Eric right away, she insisted. We can't wait, and what if they do something to the baby in the meantime? Tell him to come back from his business trip immediately. We have to pay, or I risk losing my son. We can't let that happen. Jean insisted on waiting for Eric to return, The police are in charge of this case, she argued. There's no way we can pay the ransom. Maybe the police could find something, get a lead on something. After all, we weren't walking in a field. We were in a playground in the middle of apartment buildings. Somebody must have seen us. Right? The cops have already started a search. Wait to see if there's any news. But Madison needed a ransom, so she played out another terrifying episode. Greg called her on Messenger at his mistress's request and showing her a video of a bound Braden, mouth taped shut, rambling menacingly. No police. If you report anywhere, I'll finish the kid. Bring the money tomorrow. I've got the address. That's it. Come on, why? It was impossible to recognize the man. He was dressed all in black, wearing a mask with slits for eyes. Greg's voice had been altered by a computer program. Immediately after the call, Madison continued her feigned hysteria. Don't you see, she sobbed. They know everything about us. They know everything about us. We have to call Eric right now. There's no other way out. We have to give them the money, or Braden's dead. Madison frantically dialed her husband's number and told him everything, and Eric left everything to rush into town. On the way, he contacted Anthony Adams and, stammering, explained the situation. The chief immediately suspected something wrong and asked him not to do anything until he arrived. Don't you understand? Anthony Adams asked, looking at Eric trembling with fear. Is everything here sewn up with white threads? Anthony Adams arrived at Eric's apartment before the man could even get up. Anthony Adams, like Jean, knew what was going on. Eric, on the other hand, didn't realize what he was supposed to realize. I sense that your wife is not the only one involved, Anthony Adams said openly, and was immediately confronted with a wave of indignation. What are you talking about? Eric was outraged. How could you? What does Madison have to do with this? Aren't you saying that she organized the kidnapping of her own son? That's exactly what I'm saying, Anthony nodded. I've been doing some digging into her background, and I want to tell you that I found a lot of interesting things. I'll give it to you sometime. You can read it at your leisure. At that moment, Eric was hardly aware of reality and was completely unable to adequately perceive any information, especially that concerning his wife. It seemed to him that Anthony was delusional and would take back his words at the first opportunity. But Anthony Adams wasn't going to do that. If you don't mind, I'm going up with you, he said. I'm sure it would be best if we could work this out together, especially since you can hardly do without my help. And Eric didn't care. Not at all. The only thing he cared about at that moment was where his son was and what about him. As they sobbed uncontrollably, Madison handed her husband a ransom note and told him about the kidnapper's call. Anthony Adams confirmed his suspicions. Jean remained silent. She could see how depressed her son was, who was ready to run to the bank to order the necessary amount of money. We'll pay, Eric said firmly. As much as they say, just to get Braden back. I have one son and I don't need him. And money is nothing. I'll make more money. When he found out the mother had gone to the police, he was very angry. Why did you do it? Eric exclaimed. Who asked you to do that? You have to go and get your statement now. Don't you understand? They could kill Braden. Or don't you care how you got that idea? I did it before I knew about the visitor's note, Jean muttered confusedly. But if you insist, which is fine, I'll take back my statement now. I'll say that Braden was found, ran away, lost. He was picked up by some random passerby walking his dog. And he's home now, and he's home now, and he's perfectly fine. So stop. Anthony Adams intervened in the conversation, who was beginning to be annoyed by this circus. Nobody's going anywhere. That's clear. We'll give the money to them, get Braden back, and then we'll figure out what's what. The man was a man of action, and as soon as he and Eric went to the bank, he offered to plant counterfeit money on the kidnappers. I printed a whole bunch of them once, he laughed. Just for laughs and to test my skills. The bills were in the safe, and I never used them. But it turned out to be useful. Who knew? Eric was not laughing at that moment, and he sincerely did not understand what Anthony was so happy. Your crazy idea, of course I refuse, said the man. I have one son, and God forbid anything should happen to him. No one will give him back to me. So no such jokes. We'll go to the bank right now. I'll order the money, and then we'll take it to where the kidnapper said. They're going to give me my Braden back. I don't believe it, sighed Anthony Adams, who had no intention of backing down. Anthony continued to convince Eric to do what he had in mind. Anthony Adams was confident that Braden was in no danger. Do you want me to contact a man who can find your son in a matter of hours? He offered. You sure you can do that? You want me to promise you the boy will be fine. Anthony Adams knew Madison's background. His mom and his brother and sister. He knew that's where Braden had been taken. There was nowhere else to go. It was unlikely Madison had hired some professional thugs to keep the kid in a dark basement. The mother was in total need of money, so it was highly likely she would have agreed to this adventure, knowing that Eric was willing to do absolutely anything for her son's sake. Let's go for a ride, Anthony Adams suggested. What have we got to lose? Let's go and see what's going on. If Braden isn't there, well, then we'll figure out what to do next. But I'm pretty sure your wife took the boy to his mother, who also decided to make a quick and easy buck and help her daughter stage the kidnapping. Eric didn't want to believe any of this nonsense. He couldn't believe that his wife was capable of such a thing. The man refused until the last, justifying himself by saying that he did not want to risk the life and health of his son. But in the end, Anthony Adams managed to persuade him. All right, let's go, he agreed. Only if something happens to my son. You do realize that if your assumptions are wrong, I could lose my child. Yes, I understand everything. Anthony Adams waved away, who was absolutely certain he was right. He had already contacted his security chief. My boys are coming with us, the man said. We'll pick them up now. Eric couldn't believe this was all happening to him. It wasn't until they actually found Braden at Betty's that the man had to face the harsh reality. Bursting into a small apartment located in a cottage, Anthony Adams and his guys immediately took the woman in a turn. And she didn't hide her grandson at all. The daughter asked me to help, so she did. But is that a crime, the woman wondered. I'm Braden's grandmother, and he can stay with me. As unfortunate as it was, Madison could indeed get away with it. Unless, of course, it could be proven that Greg had demanded the money from Eric. Anthony Adams had been too heavy-handed and head-on. After the father and his boss had taken Braden away from Betty, the woman had called her daughter immediately. Ladies, whispered Madison, who had no choice but to run out into the stairwell. When she saw her mother's cell phone number pop up on the screen, I'm listening to you. What's wrong? Quit your adventure, Betty whispered. Your husband just arrived with some men. I don't know how they got my address and guessed I had Braden, but they took your son. God, Madison, why did I even get involved in this? I mean, we could go to jail. What about the kids? Do you have any idea what's going to happen to them? Your Greg's idea was completely absurd. You're on your own now. Betty agreed to help her daughter just for the money. Madison had promised a substantial sum of money for her to take Braden in for a while. What are you guys up to? The woman asked excitedly. Why would you drag a baby all the way out here? A several-hour car ride. Mommy, it's the way it has to be, Madison replied. Can't you just help me? Madison didn't go into details. She only told me briefly, assuring me that everything would be okay. And that's how it turned out. Her mother knew about her daughter's relationship with Greg and didn't understand her at all. It would have been fine if you'd traded your Eric for some wealthy man, the woman reasoned. But who did you get involved with? That beggarly bastard. He was a fool, and he's still a fool. No good will ever come of him. So you're wasting your time with your husband. If he finds out, it'll be bad for you and your son. Madison was less interested in Braden's fate than in her own well-being. When her mother had told her that their whole adventure had been discovered, Madison had been terrified. What's going to happen now? Madison lamented. She contacted Greg. Would Eric put me with his son? Don't worry about it, grinned the grief-stricken lover, who had no doubt they'd get away with it. They'll never prove anything in their lives. So they ran your address, got your background, found Braden. So you went to your grandmother's house. What's the big deal? You won't get the money, which means you won't be able to pay off your mother-in-law. What mother-in-law? Madison was furious. What are you talking about? Eric's going to divorce me anyway. It's over. How can you not see that? There was no doubt about it. Eric came home very angry, and without even saying hello, asked his mother to take Braden for a walk while he talked to his wife. Anthony Adams did not accompany him, thinking it would be embarrassing already. Well, he smiled. I'm glad you've finally seen the light. I warned you, and as you can see, my intuition was right. Good luck to you. I'll see you at work. Me and the guys are going on vacation. Madison could tell by the look on Eric's face that nothing good was in store for her. She'd never seen her husband so angry. Well, he said, looking intently into his wife's eyes, let's not put our conversation on hold. Eric literally flooded Madison with questions about the family and everything else, but most importantly, about Braden. How could you? He wondered. He's your son. He's not just mine, he's yours. And you. I can't even imagine how I could be so wrong about you. I hope you realize I won't let you anywhere near my son now. If you think you're going to get off scot-free, you're not. You know how much Braden means to me and how much I love him. He's the most precious thing I have. I loved you too. I loved you too. I loved you so much. But as it turns out, you betrayed me. And you did it so stupidly. Did you really think what you were planning would go away? I'm not a complete fool. And I'm not surrounded by idiots. The same Anthony Adams. I mean, he knew what you were right away. I'm the one who's a fool for believing you, and you're the one who didn't. Madison realized that she had nothing to lose, and decided to tell her husband what prompted her to this stupid and reckless act. Listen to me, Eric, she exclaimed. I think you should know about this. It was your mother. If she hadn't started blackmailing me and demanding money, none of this would have happened. I'm sorry, but I just can't keep quiet. It's too much. So Madison told her husband, hoping to drive a wedge between her and Jean. Eric, however, resented his wife for taking it out on his mother. What does she have to do with this? He resented. How dare you accuse her of anything? And you tell me about all this as if nothing happened. You also cheated on me, that is, betrayed me. And it's my mother's fault. Well, of course, who else would it be? Eric couldn't take his wife's words adequately. Later, when things had settled down a few days later, Madison had no choice but to leave home that same day and temporarily move back in with her mother and brother and sister. She had some money to rent an apartment. But before she could start a new life, Madison needed to process everything that had happened. She couldn't get her head around the fact that Eric had figured her out so quickly, and she and Greg and Betty wouldn't get a dime. Eric was going to have a separate and very serious conversation with Jean. If what Madison had said was true, it was another low blow. So besides his wife, his mother had betrayed him. And that wasn't an easy thing to get over. Oh my God, son, how could you think such a thing? Jean wailed when Eric asked her directly if Madison was telling the truth. I didn't mean it. I couldn't even imagine that she would come up with something like that. Eric realized that he was partly to blame for what had happened to his son. If he'd agreed to pay for his mother's repairs, it wouldn't have occurred to her to blackmail her daughter-in-law. But cheating was a very mean thing to do. And Eric couldn't understand why his mother hid the fact of his wife's infidelity from him. Why are you doing this to me? Did you have the decency to hide the fact that Madison was cheating on me? Bringing a lover into our apartment and having fun with him in our marital bed. Son, but I meant well. Jean sighed bitterly. I didn't want to destroy your family, since you chose Madison and she gave birth to your son. Then it was meant to be fate had decreed it. I had no right to interfere. I was hoping that after this, she'd come to her senses, get a job. After all, she wasn't doing anything good. But instead of coming to her senses, she faked her son's kidnapping. How was I supposed to know she was capable of that? I guess Braden was the only good thing left in Eric's life after everything that had happened. His mother and his wife had treated him like scum, and he loved them so dearly. But he decided not to litigate or file a complaint. He would just divorce Madison and help Jean with the repairs. She was finally able to tell Eric why she'd resisted selling the apartment. And after that, everything fell into place. Eric was a big dreamer. After listening to his mother, he immediately started building barricades in his head and inventing secrets, which made Jean smile skeptically. Son, she grinned, do you really think that if we take apart the old rubble, we'll find something we don't know about? Do you believe it yourself? That's the thing Eric did. That's why he decided to give his mother money from his savings for the repairs. If Jean hadn't told him about his late grandmother's instructions, he never would have agreed to renovate this wreck. That's how many months of life and wasted time to remove debris, replace wiring. Flooring will take at least 3 months, and you have to supervise the workers. And who better than Eric to do all that? Who else will help his mother if not his beloved only son? Eric didn't know what to do. So much had happened in his life lately. Not so long ago he was absolutely happy and could not even imagine that everything would turn out this way. First of all, the man had to deal with his wife, who in all likelihood will claim the joint apartment. Eric did not think that everything would turn out this way, and did not insure himself in case of divorce. He hoped that Madison had enough conscience not to tear a piece of at least from his son, especially since the house was on credit, and she hadn't made a single payment in all that time. But Eric was wrong. When Madison came to her senses a little after everything that had happened, the first thing she thought of was the apartment. She wanted half of it, of course. How could it be otherwise? It was jointly owned property, after all. At least that was the law. And Eric knew he could hardly argue with that. Eric was willing to give his wife anything to give up her son. He offered a fair deal. He would forget about the whole unpleasant story with the kidnapping and extortion, and she would write an official renunciation of Braden. That's the deal. Otherwise, he'll take action. According to him, if they wanted to, they'd find evidence that she'd kidnapped her own son for ransom. Madison didn't see this coming. She was used to her spouse always being soft and going easy on her. True, Eric had been able to forgive his wife anything before, even infidelity, but not what she'd done. "Do you realize how immoral this is?" he asked. "What if we hadn't found Braden? If Anthony Adams hadn't realized this was your idea? What would you have done with the boy if I hadn't paid the ransom?" Madison didn't know the answer and only shrugged her shoulders. She hadn't expected such a development herself. Now she had a difficult choice to make. "Daughter, do it, please," Betty instructed, hoping Madison would help her around the house again. "You've done so much wrong. If you go to jail, I won't survive it. We've already got 7 of us. How are you going to raise your son on your own? You figure it out. Leave Braden to Eric. You're still young. You'll find happiness." For Madison, happiness was about money and freedom. She'd learned that during her years of marriage. Her son was a burden. She didn't want to spend her life raising him, so she agreed to Eric's proposal. After that, Eric began to repair the apartment of Jean's mother, with whom he had little contact. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't forgive her for taking part in the adventure. Jean understood everything and hoped that Eric would cool down and accept everything that had happened. Most importantly, Madison had disappeared from Eric's life. That was something that Jean was very happy about. Despite the guilt she felt, she realized that it was for the best. If she hadn't caught Madison with her lover and offered to pay her off, Eric might have lived a lifetime of lies. Now, despite the loss, her son had a chance to build a real relationship. That was gratifying, especially since the money lost in the divorce was more than recouped in the most unexpected way. It turned out that Alexandra Georgia, not in vain, asked her daughter not to sell the apartment. The woman had one secret. Soon after the renovation began, mother and son discovered something that made them have to urgently dismiss the workers. They couldn't let either of them know the contents of the stash, which was deep in the wall. As soon as Eric, who had taken some time off to supervise the repairs, saw some strange door, he immediately informed the workers that they could rest temporarily. "How come?" marveled one of them. "We've only just begun." "You'll continue later," replied Eric, who was confident that he could open the hiding place on his own. He immediately called his mother, who was temporarily living with Braden in his apartment. Jean had nowhere else to go during the renovation, and Eric, deep down, was glad to have his mother around. Otherwise, who would take care of Madison's son? She was no longer with them, and never would be. Jean rushed to the apartment with her grandson. By then, Eric had already opened the stash and was sitting on the dirty floor, reading some old dusty notebook and going through some gold jewelry. "Mother of God," Jean exclaimed when she saw it all. "What the hell is this?" It turned out that Alexandra Georgia was not so simple as she seemed at first sight, and had made quite a substantial fortune during her life, which, however, she had not been able to use, for she had received all this gold as gifts from her numerous cavaliers. That was what it was called at the time. No one would ever dare to talk about anything like that openly. For many years, the woman kept both silence and gold, which during the renovation of the apartment she hid in a special cache, made by the hands of her spouse. It turns out that Dad knew about all this, Jean muttered confusedly, going through the gold jewelry and reading the lines of her mother's personal diary, which she also put in the stash and did not take out for many years. Well, Grandma's got it going on, muttered Eric, who was in complete shock at the find. Jean shared her son's feelings completely. Like him, she couldn't believe what she had just read. It was beyond her usual reality of right and wrong and all kinds of principles, and the woman didn't know how to feel about it. Though on the other hand, what did it all matter anyway? Her mother was long since in the grave, and Jean knew so little of her past that it was certainly not her place to judge or condemn Alexandra Georgia. She had done what she thought was right, and no one had the right to point a finger at her, especially not after her death. The question before Eric was what to do with all this now. Grandmother was trying for the future, including his future. She also wanted her children and grandchildren to live richly after her death, which was written in her diary. But it will not be possible to realize it here, he reasoned. Firstly, there is too much gold, and secondly, there are rare and very interesting specimens which can be very valuable. His grandmother's admirers were high-ranking people, and these gifts could be used very profitably. Eric realized that if he sold the entire contents of the small chest, the money would be enough for the rest of his life. Not that he wanted to quit his job and parasitize on everything. It was just that it was a pretty decent capital for the future. And first of all, the man thought not of himself, but of his son, for whom he wanted to provide a good start, so that Braden would not have to break through the wall for career and money. And except for Anthony Adams, Eric had no one else to consult with. He was the only one who could come up with a good idea. And only the chief had such extensive connections, with the help of which the received gold could be converted into big money without the risk of getting into serious trouble with the law. Of course, Eric had offered him a share, as he was convinced it was the right thing to do. But Anthony Adams refused and, laughing, confessed that he had an offer for Eric that he was sure he couldn't refuse. Just as he had a few years ago, Eric smiled. "What's true is true," nodded Anthony Adams, who also noticed that there was such a resemblance. Anthony Adams had long dreamed of growing his business overseas. He was always striving for more, and was by no means going to stop there. And who but Eric he was to send on a long business trip. "There, you live there, and observe everything," the chief reasoned. "Perhaps you'll get the hang of it and won't want to come back, and I'll help you move the wealth overseas. I've got one man who'll do it right." And it was indeed another offer that could not be refused. A change of scenery was the only thing that could help Eric at that moment, and naturally he agreed at once. And after a while, as Anthony Adams expected, he got used to it. Not a year later, as the man began a completely different life, he met his true love, although he put a ban on personal relationships and no longer hoped for anything. Now Eric had everything he could dream of, and really big money, and his own business, which he ran in parallel with the affairs of Anthony Adams, paying tribute for support and help, and a loving wife and mother who had moved in with Braden when Eric finally settled overseas. He never even thought about Madison. But when she found out who Eric had become and how he lived now, she regretted having done that to him. But it was too late to change anything. Those times when Eric had loved her and was willing to do anything for her were irrevocably gone. Now he had a new love. And not a false one, but a real one, fully earned at the cost of betrayal and suffering that could have been avoided if he had opened his eyes a little earlier to the woman who had always been by his side.